Call the meeting to order. This is the Town Plan and Zoning Commission of the Town of Fairfield for February 25th, 2020. The first item on our agenda are the meeting minutes for February 11th, 2020. Okay, so motion to approve by Commissioner Francis. Second by Commissioner Noonan. Thank you. Any comment or discussion on the minutes?
Just one comment on the minutes,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. I don't think they reflect the vote on the zone change application.
So we have on the top of page 2, we have the caption for that paragraph is 980 High Street, and whereas the first one, you're correct, it speaks to the zoning regulation amendment. That one actually says a zone change. It is the motion to deny the application to establish a design residence district. A zone change is not necessary. Does that?
Just, I'm not sure that it reflects the vote to deny it. It says the motion was made.
Oh, I see.
Then,
forgive me. You're correct. It does not say that the members present voted to deny. I skipped right over that. Very good.
And I abstained.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was an abstention. So,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That's correct. We just need to include the vote. It was the same vote as the preceding item. It's just not noted in that line.
that's right, as well as the abstention of Mr. Brayman. So that's a fairly significant change. That's not a typo. So should we table these until next time?
Well, that's entirely up to you. You certainly can. There's no harm in doing so. Otherwise, I'm fully aware of the omission that needs to be corrected. So whatever your pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So Commissioner Francis, it's your motion's on the table, so you would have to withdraw it if you wanted to table to see a second draft.
You don't feel we could just amend it?
Well, we'd have to speak the words, I guess.
We need to add you have the motion listed. Motion was made by Mr. Noonan, seconded by Mr. Corcoran. And what we need to add is the members present voted to deny, and then list at the bottom that Commissioner Brayman abstained. So it was a 6-0 to 1.
Okay. So you then amend your motion to include the statement that Mr. Wendt just made. Yes?
Yes.
All right. So amended. And Commissioner Noonan?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Brayman. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? So the minutes as amended are approved unanimously. Next is 1501 Kings Highway East, a request of Powers Court Property, LLC, for 100% release of a $17,008 bond pertaining to a special permit improvements in the Design Commercial District.
Mr. Chairman, this property is on the south side of Kings Highway, on the stretch of Kings Highway that runs between the Whole Foods development and then the Fairfield Metro Station. There's an aerial photo that we've attached to your packet that shows this was an industrial piece that got renovated for office occupancy in conjunction with the property they also own next door at 1525 Kings Highway. There is a report in your file from the engineering department recommending 100% release of the bond, and we concur and recommend its release.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion to approve the bond release by Commissioner Brayman.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Francis. Thanks. Any comments on this? Appears to be straightforward. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Bond release is approved unanimously. Next is 500 Algonquin Road, request of Brooklawn Country Club for a 50% release of a $26,600 bond pertaining to special exception improvements in the AAA zone.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to recuse myself.
Very good, thank you. So, Madam Clerk, who do we have for an alternate to sit for Commissioner? Okay, Commissioner Elliott, you're on? All right, Commissioner Elliott will sit for Commissioner Noonan. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, as the item says, Brooklawn Country Club was approved last year to do improvements to their paddle tennis center. There is a report in your packet from the engineering department saying most of the drainage work is completed, and this is not a full release of the bond, it's a 50% release. And they concur that more than 50% of the bonded improvements are done, and we are therefore recommending its release.
Okay. Thank you. I have a motion on this one. Thank you. Motion to approve by Commissioner Levy and second by Commissioner Corcoran. I have a question. It's not clear to me whether the bond posted was 66.6 or if 26.6, or if that represents 50%.
The 26.6 is the 100%
Right.
amount.
So 13,300
Correct.
is the amount to be released.
Correct, and we will retain the equal amount.
Right. Very good. Okay. Any other questions on this? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. We have noted one recusal. And then the bond release is for 50% in the amount of $13,300 is approved unanimously. Next is new applications to recommend a public hearing, 3135 Easton Turnpike and 95 Congress Street. Special exception application of the town of Fairfield parking to the construction of a new sewer pump station in the residential R3 zone and the Design Research District.
I don't know whether,
Yeah,
the word parking doesn't belong there.
It seems to be a little odd. To the town of Fairfield, it's application to the town of Fairfield
Should be pertaining to,
for,
not parking.
for the, or pertaining to.
All right, so this, there is presently, out in front of the former GE, now SHU West Campus property, a sewer pump station that needs to be replaced. So this is an application made by the town to replace that sewer pump station. It is a use of the town of Fairfield.
Bless you.
That does require public hearings. So it's simply to replace the existing sewer pump station that presently exists.
Okay.
And the reason why it's /95 Congress Street is because there's a property line. This pump station is kind of bisected by the property line of Sacred Heart University in the state of Connecticut, which owns a pretty wide swath within the right-of-way of the Merritt Parkway. So that is why those two addresses are both listed. But it's something that needs to, I don't expect it to be a lengthy matter, but it does require a public hearing.
Very good, thank you. Can I have a motion?
I move to take this to public hearing.
Motion by Commissioner Corcoran,
Second.
second by Commissioner Noonan. Thanks. Motion, a public hearing is required. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? The item is moved to public hearing unanimously. Next is old business, 980 High Street, zoning compliance application of the Fairfield Housing Corporation pertaining to a 40-unit affordable housing development pursuant to Section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, as was noted in the review of the minutes, the regulation amendment and the zone change piece of this application was disposed of at the last meeting. What remains is the site plan application. This proposal consists of 5 new buildings with a total, and this is pretty much the summary that I read last time, but I'll just stick to the script here. 5 new buildings with a total of 40 residential apartments. The applicant will deed restrict 70% or 29 of those units for below market rate housing for 50 years, and 11 will be at market rate. Of the 40 units, 18 are 1-bedroom, 16 are 2-bedroom, and 6 are 3-bedroom units. Buildings are 3 stories with a midpoint roof height of approximately 30 feet. The existing farmhouse on the site is proposed to be converted to an office and community room for tenants. 50 parking spaces are proposed, or 1.25 spaces per unit. The chief concerns raised during the hearing were with regard to drainage, environmental impact, and traffic, as well as concerns regarding the overall density and impact to the neighborhood. As this commission is aware, the standards of review of an affordable housing application differ from a typical zoning application. For a denial of an affordable housing application to be sustained, the burden is on the commission to prove that, based on evidence in the record, that a decision from which is taken and the reasons cited for it are supported by sufficient evidence in the record. The commission shall also have the burden to prove that A, the decision is necessary to protect substantial interests in health, safety, or other matters over which the commission has jurisdiction. B, such public interests clearly outweigh the need for affordable housing. And C, those public interests cannot be protected by reasonable changes to the affordable housing development. We have referenced in the past, and I have provided you previously with a couple of reference court cases, but those cases have indicated that the record must establish more than a mere possibility of harm to a substantial public interest. The record must contain evidence as to a quantifiable probability that such a specific harm will result if the application is granted. Mere concerns alone do not amount to sufficient evidence to support a denial of an affordable housing application. There was an environmental intervention filed here alleging that it's the likely possibility of unreasonable pollution to the air, water, and other natural resources. Specifically, the interveners claim the drainage system is flawed and will result in impact on the adjacent wetlands. The interveners rely on two expert reports and the findings of the Inland Wetlands Agency in their decision that denied the Inland Wetlands application. But as we discussed last time, it is important to note that the Inland Wetland Agency does not have the same burden of balancing the potential environmental harm against the need for affordable housing that this commission does. In the Carr case that we had distributed, it's also cited in the intervener's brief on page 13, indicates the report of a conservation commission is not binding on a planning and zoning commission. And further on the next page, the planning and zoning commission, which is subject to an affordable housing provisions, is required to balance the harm caused by an affordable housing development against the need for affordable housing. So you have to, in this case, weigh that potential harm against that need for affordable housing. And as we did discuss at length last time, it should be understood that if the commission were to vote to approve this proposal, the development cannot move forward until the wetlands issues are resolved. If the inland wetland rejection is sustained on appeal, the project cannot move forward as it's presently designed. If substantial changes are required to resolve those issues, then that application would have to return to this commission for a new application. The town's engineering department reviewed the drainage plan, the peer review, and the expert reports of the intervener. And the town engineer, and we provided a memo last time, is satisfied that the applicant's design does not agree with the intervener's engineer. There were some recommendations, though, found in that peer review that the town engineer is recommending to consider should you vote to approve this application. And those include the provision that catch basins be outfitted with 4-foot deep sumps, hooded outlets, and permanent silt sacks. The construction of the clay lens to be overseen by a qualified engineer, and that limits be staked in the field by the surveyor. That was with respect to the permeable pavement. A certification by the reviewing professional that the system is installed in conformance with the plans. A planting berm 3 feet wide, 12 inches high along the southerly border, and including a filter fabric in the gravel reservoir detail. There were some additional comments with respect to the affordability plan that needs to have some revisions made to it, which should also be made a condition if this is going to move forward. And there were a recommendation in the traffic report to establish no parking areas along the site frontage for the sight line. We did table this matter last time. On further review of the file, I do not have any new issues to raise at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for that summary. Can I have a motion on this item so that we can start to discuss?
I would move to approve the application subject to the conditions outlined by the town engineer and the Affordability Commission.
There was one other condition mentioned with respect to parking along the frontage that was recommended in the parking, in the traffic report.
Yeah,
Are you including that as well?
Well, and perhaps to staff, that would be something that would be up to the police commission. I don't think that's something the applicant has control over.
Yeah, we can make it a recommendation and forward that to the police commission, but I believe that's correct. It does require the action of another agency, so we can make the recommendation and be up to the police commission.
So the motion then is to approve with the conditions as stated by Mr. Wendt, along with a recommendation to the police commissioner to remove the parking along the frontage of the property. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Corcoran?
I'll second that.
Okay. So moved by Commissioner Levy and seconded by Commissioner Corcoran. So as is fairly customary, Commissioner Levy, would you like to start?
Certainly. As I mentioned at our last meeting, I think I, as well as all the members of this commission, are very much aware of the concerns of the neighborhood, particularly as it relates to the density of this project, the potential traffic concerns, the potential impact it'll have on the environment, as well as stormwater drainage and so forth. But when we're dealing with an application that's subject to 830G, the courts have set a very high bar and standard with respect to the evidence that must be before us, you know, in connection with any threats posed or concerns for the health and safety of the public. And based upon the evidence that I've heard, I do not feel that there's substantial evidence or sufficient evidence to support our finding a threat to the health and safety of the general public, let alone the even higher bar that would apply on a plenary review by the court of the record. So on that basis, to the extent that this is an 830G application, I would move to approve based on the record as presented.
Thank you. Commissioner Corcoran?
I'm not real happy with the design of this this complex. It doesn't have room for children. I think the buildings are too high for the neighborhood. They're too close to the property line. But I don't think we can consider those things, given it's an 830G application. Based on what I've read in the court cases about what standards we need to use to decide on this, I believe that we are obliged to find that the need for affordable housing outweighs any other concerns.
Commissioner Noonan?
I concur with both my colleagues. The issues that were brought up and summarized quickly by Mr. Wendt with respect to drainage, we initially had somewhat of a duel of experts. The problem is, maybe not less of a problem, our own town engineer has approved the plan. It would be hard pressed upon us to rely upon Ms. Pooley so often and then have to contradict her in this case, especially when not only she approves of the design, but not in the expert from the applicant, and then 2 peer reviews as well. The environmental concerns, I think as the chair had brought up last time, will be dealt with by the courts. The decision handed down by the court either affirming what the Inland Wetlands Commission does or overruling it. Either way, if they were to overrule the Wetlands Commission, for us to find that environmental impact outweighs the need for affordable housing strikes me as an awkward and odd decision to make in light of what the court may do at that point. The traffic concerns that I had brought up mostly dealt with the on-street parking, that by putting cars on the road of what seems to be maybe not the busiest street in Fairfield, but nonetheless a busy street, adds unnecessary impediments on the road. The fact that we're going to be recommending that the cars be not parked in front of the project itself, but in fact on the neighbors. Seems to be a little bit of an extra blow, though I understand our recommendation is to improve the sight lines and improve safety, so seems to be an extra blow to the neighbors, not unwarranted or not unreasonable. Again, I concur with my colleagues that as much as I would like to deny, I don't see a basis for it based on the standards set forth, and should we deny, we'd be essentially just setting up the court to, I believe, overrule us down the line anyways.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Brayman.
I agree with much of what has been said. If we had unlimited discretion in this matter, I might look differently upon this project. Certainly, the neighbors raised significant concerns as to many aspects of the project, but the affordable housing statute clearly circumscribes our discretion, so I would be in favor of approval.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Commissioner Braun?
I think the commission has the discretion and should use the discretion. There is a public policy in the state of Connecticut to support environmental issues and to protect our environment and our natural resources. It's all through the statutes. I could read it, but it's there. There's nothing in the statutes that prevents us from adopting the position of the Wetlands Commission, which is that this will cause irreparable harm to the environment and that there are feasible, prudent alternatives. They are the experts. They made that determination. We don't have to adopt their opinion, but I think in this case we should. We have an expert that says this drainage system will fail. It will turn into a massive bathtub. The town engineer's report, I don't think it was no guarantee that it wouldn't fail. Basically, it said this should not happen in one of her statements. That's not a guarantee that it won't fail. So we have an expert saying it will fail. We have other experts that don't guarantee it won't fail. To me, that's significant. But more importantly, we have, after hearings with experts before the Wetlands Agency, we have their determination that there are feasible, prudent alternatives. The wetlands laws and the environmental laws are remedial in nature, as is the housing law. I don't think one supersedes the other. So when you have two, I think this commission should let the court decide. Do we care more about affordable housing, which can be put anywhere else in town, doesn't have to be on this parcel, or just as the Wetlands Agency found, it could be smaller scale. Can we cut it back by 50% and approve a 50% development? Why not? Why can't we consider that and let the court decide if the natural resources that our expert agency determined will be irreparably harmed are not superseded by an affordable housing application that is just plain too big for this site. So I believe that this, my mic is breaking up. We have the authority, we should use the authority, and we should make the decision that the environment in this era of climate change, flooding, and all kinds of bad things happening, we need to step it up and elevate it. And by the way, the Wetlands Agency is not a general environmental protection agency. The Wetlands Agency can only decide on wetlands and watercourses. Everything else is up to us. So it's up to us to step up and make a decision that will protect our environment, because once this is gone, it never comes back. So I would vote against it, or I don't know how to make the motion. I don't think I can do it with his motion pending, but I would move to reduce it by 50%. To avoid perhaps a lengthy court case. Thank you.
So, very good. Thank you very much. I have some comments in response to that, and I'd love to discuss that further, but I'll let others speak their minds before I do. Commissioner Francis?
I tend to agree that it's too big for the site. It's not that it's affordable housing. It's just too large. It's too large for the site. The sidewalks are very poor in that area for children having to walk to school. It bothers me that there's no grass in the middle, that it's all parking lot, that cars are going to have to park on the street, the neighboring streets. It's just too large. It's too much for a couple of acres to do this many units. They're attractive, it's a good idea, but there's too much. And I would concur, it would be wonderful to see it amended to be reduced by 50%. I think we could get a lot of agreement. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? So the application that was denied before the Conservation Commission was on the merits, right? And so, they don't have the burden of not only deciding that it didn't comply with our regulations, our conservation regulations, but our burden to decide whether, in light of that, do those deviations from the regulations also outweigh the need for affordable housing and also pose this, not more than speculation, but a probability of an identifiable harm to the public health and safety and welfare. So, if we allow the court to determine the validity of that denial on the basis of the plan that's been submitted, and if that is justified, then this cannot be built. Then they have to go back to conservation with a new plan, an amended plan, and go through that process again, and also come back to our commission for approval in the same way that they have done now. If we elevate the denial of conservation to a status of outweighing the need for affordable housing and approve this with a condition that the project be reduced by 50%, then we will circumvent the court's ability to deny or to affirm the Conservation Commission's denial and have the applicant have to re-engineer the plan and go back through the whole process all over again. So I've thought about this significantly. Everyone in the room should understand that on the basis of an 830G application, the developer does not have to comply with any of our regulations, the zoning regulations, setbacks, height, square floor area, all of those things which sort of keep the scale of our neighborhoods, all right, and so forth. Many of the things that we have identified here that we don't like about this plan, that it seems that it is too large for the parcel, that there are, the sidewalks are not, convenient and so forth. Courts look at that as convenience factors, right? So this is a really difficult, position. It's a very awkward position for us to be in, because by the same token, we decide these things, these very significant cases with frequency, and our decisions are scrutinized by the courts. And those judges come to recognize who we are as a town, as a commission, and our individual members, and the voices that we have in those transcripts. When they review these records and they see the comments that we make about supporting affordable housing or not, or making irrational decisions that don't have a chance to withstand, review on appeal. So, I do believe that there are issues with the wetlands, right? But I think that we are best served by allowing that issue to be decided by the courts, not seeking to amend the plan, but letting it live and die on the basis of the issues that you have articulated and that we heard from the experts who testified. If indeed those issues are as significant and as real as you have said, then the experts have made that record, The Conservation Commission has denied their application, and our courts should uphold that denial. And in which case, this application cannot proceed. All right? So I appreciate everything that you said, and if I felt that we could legally deny this on another basis, I would. But I looked at the record, and we do not have a basis to deny for traffic concerns. We have sight lines. We have, we have to maintain our credibility with the courts. And so for all those reasons, I think that your position isn't well-founded, as much as I, don't want to disagree with you. But, and as much as I want to support what you're saying, I think we are better served in allowing that process to come to conclusion. And if it is the way you say it is, then it will have the result that you want. So for everyone who's here for this application, you have to know that we all struggle with this. And it's not easy to sit in front of you and have to talk about these things in this way. And for the neighbors, for those people who are living next door to this parcel, I understand that the prospect of having this structure built as close to the property lines as they have proposed and as tall as they have proposed is going to be a burden that you weren't anticipating and you never expected when you bought your house in a zone which had zoning regulations which you thought everybody needed to comply with. Take it to Hartford. Write your representatives. Go to the hearings. Every year, there is an effort to amend 830G. Senator Huang, who was here earlier, will tell you that. Select Woman Kupchik will tell you that she worked on the Housing Committee and that she had involvement in amending 830G to make it more rational. We in this town need to support affordable housing by the same token. And there are rules and court decisions that guide us in that prospect. So in this application, especially in this application, I just want you all to know that, none of us here have approached this lightly. And in this particular application, I think that if this does get built, it will have an impact on all of you in that community, which was unforeseen, and we struggled with this, as I hope you can tell by the comments and the discussion that we're having here today. So that's what I wanted to say. Anyone else have any comments? So the motion on the table is to approve with recommendations regarding engineering and the affordability plan as outlined by Mr. Wendt, as well as a recommendation to the police commissioner to eliminate parking on the frontage of this property. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? One nay. Commissioner Braun. So the application is approved 6-1 with conditions as stated.
Before you move to public hearing, Mr. Chairman, I just want to explain for the commissioners that weren't privy to our previous discussion. On your table before you is a packet of information that has nothing to do with tonight's meeting. It's for next week for the continuation of the Metro Center proposal. The bound material is just simply the presentation that you already saw, the PowerPoint. It's just a hard copy of it, and some other materials addressing some of the questions that came up. I just wanted to get that to you before next week's meeting, so I hope it doesn't get lost in the paperwork shuffle on your tables. I just wanted a quick explanation of what those were.
Thank you. And now we move to public hearing. 1521, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to take things a little bit out of order. The item number 2, C2, 391 Meadow Street. Special exception application of attorney Frank Johnson on behalf of Pet Moms Doggy Daycare to establish a dog daycare in a portion of an existing building in the design commercial district.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. We are here to ask this board to approve a special exception for a dog daycare. The proposed building is located at 391 Meadow Street with its entrance on 222 Kings Highway cutoff. It is in a section 12.4 design commercial district. In accordance with section 12.4.28, the following uses are permitted, subject to securing a special exception in accordance with section 27 of the zoning regulations. I appeared before this board in the past to have section 12.4.28.7 added to the zoning regulations, which will allow doggy daycare, which this board so graciously approved. At that time, we asked for a special exception to a property a few doors down at 154 Kings Highway, which was granted. Unfortunately, the lease negotiations for that property broke down. We have been diligently searching for a new location, and now years later have found one also located on King Highway cutoff, only a few buildings down from our previously approved site. The permitted uses in the design commercial district for the doggy daycare use would include a commercial dog daycare, provided that there's no overnight kenneling nor occupied more than one dog per 50 square feet of indoor space, must provide an outdoor dog run therein, which is fenced in, fence to be designed to prevent animals from overhanging any property lines, and facility must be inspected and licensed by the state of Connecticut and cannot abut a residential district. We comply with all these regulations. Pet Moms Doggy Daycare is a facility which is permitted, subject to the special exception. There will not be any kenneling or boarding in this facility, nor will we use kenneling as an alternative to playing with the dogs. We have indoor play area and an outdoor play area, which is fenced areas significant in size to encourage play and fresh air, such as maneuvering with agile equipment, climbing on safe play equipment, throw relief games, and keep away, and also a kiddie pool in there. The Pet Mom Doggy Daycare intends to operate from a single freestanding building with indoor-outdoor access with fencing and barriers which not disturb neighbors, access to outdoor runs and play areas, special flooring and ventilation. This building has 2 large garage doors which will be open, which will exit into the play area. The Connecticut Department of Agriculture requires that the dog care obtain a license. One requirement of this license is approval by the local zoning board. The accommodations are structured as required by the State Department of Agriculture. And our proposed hours are 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. And then plus half days, 6:30 till noon, 1 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Weekend hours to be determined. Potential clients from Fairfield have already been inquiring and are waiting. It is close to I-95, Route 15, Route 8, and less than 2.5 miles to an emergency veterinarian. We'll be following all the recommendations of the American Boarding Kenneling Associations, and the doggy daycare professionals recommend in setting up this daycare.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Francis.
Is this up on the first floor? I went down Meadow Street.
It's actually, no, it's going to be
It's
facing
under?
Kings Highway, so it's actually the basement floor,
Okay.
which really has no use because it's basically a garage storage area.
Where's the play area going to be?
The play area is going to be in front. If you look at the map, I don't,
Where the 2 vans were parked that say
it's
doggy daycare
actually
or something?
across from
Pink dog.
where the garage doors enter here, and then the play area is going to be a fenced-in area over in this area.
Okay. Is
Outside.
it paved right now? Or
It is paved right now, so they'll be putting down, I believe, crushed stone and stuff, so. And I think this area here, I believe is going to be grass over here.
The other buildings, the other tenants aren't using it for parking. It looked all very paved and parked to me.
Correct. There's no tenant there right now on the bottom floor at all. It's empty.
So you're not disrupting anybody else's
Not
work.
disrupting. They're going to occupy the entire basement floor. So, and that parking is facing their area. And there's really is no, the only people that are going to be parking are going to be the people that are actually working there as far as, because it's going to be a drop-off and pickup.
Commissioner Brayman.
Your statement of use on page 2 under outdoor, you mention outdoor play yard will be surrounded by stockade and, if possible, noise-reducing fencing with locked gates. Why do you say if possible for noise-reducing fencing with locked gates?
Whichever type of fencing that we can acquire. I'm not even sure what type of, it's going to be a white plastic type fencing, so it'll be impervious to any urine or anything else.
But you're not certain whether it will be noise-reducing or not?
I don't know if they make that. If it's manufactured, then that's what we'd be getting.
And what security features will the outdoor area for the dogs have?
The entrance to the outdoor area is going to be facing the inside of the building. So it'll be facing the interior garage door. So there'll be no access from the outside.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have a
Commissioner Braun?
question. The abutting neighbors at 411 and 379, 36, are those residences or are those businesses?
All businesses. There's no residential area abutting.
And that's on this aerial, but then I can't figure out where it is on the other aerial you showed. Does that, does it show on there? I don't, oh, that's not this one? Sorry.
That's not the,
Okay.
yeah, the
Get it,
application.
you showed us one aerial. Okay. So there's no residences
No,
involved?
no,
Okay.
and this is facing Kings Highway.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
And have
Commissioner
these,
Francis.
abutting neighbors been notified, Phil Cerrone Architects?
There's no residential abutting
No, it's
neighbors,
a
so it's just
business.
commercial, just businesses.
Right, I think her
So-
question is, have you notified the adjacent businesses of this proposal?
No, because there's no one really, it's a freestanding building, and there's really no one next to them as far as that, but we
They're
have not
very
notified.
next to them.
Yeah, we have not notified anyone. We're just from the public record. I don't think there's anyone occupying those buildings.
Mr. Wendt, do they get the 500 feet notice? 200 feet? So Cerrone Architect has been notified? Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yep, Commissioner Brayman.
Just based on a quick visit to the site, it appeared that there was a residential use at 379 Meadow. I may be mistaken about that, but I suppose that is not, in any event, next to the outdoor play area.
Correct, because the outdoor play area is facing Kings Highway cutoff.
But do you know whether or not the 379 is a residence versus a business?
My understanding is it's not a residential zone, so.
I know it's not a residential zone, but do you know whether 379 is?
I do not.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll move to a public comment on this application. Is there any member of the public that wishes to be heard on this? Please, come on up.
This is a rare occasion I even
Thanks. You
come
just
up
need-
in front of any.
Just state your name for the record.
Matthew Benjamin. I live over on Sterling Street. I've known Cheryl for quite a few years. I also know where the building is, across from the car dealership. I can't honestly find any reason not to have a business there with her heading it. Business-wise, you know, I think there's more effect from traffic than there's going to be from the animals. So, with Cheryl leading it, I could never say no to her. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Well said. Any other members of the public? Very good. So we can turn to rebuttal, but I really don't think that there is a need for that. So I'll offer it. Looks like he's already. You good? Are you good? We're fine. Very good. Thank you very much. I'll close the public hearing on this item. Next is C1, 15-21 Beacon View Drive, zoning compliance application of John and Gillen LLC for a 20-unit residential development pursuant to Section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes. This hearing is continued from January 28th, 2020. I believe that all of us, yes, Commissioner Braun. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Braun's recusing herself. Moving along the line, Commissioner Gordon, you'll sit in for Commissioner Braun on this one, okay? Thank you. So when we last left off, we were in public comment. Question had been raised with respect to the collection of data and analysis of sightlines. Since that time, the Fairfield Police Department, I understand, has conducted some further study, produced some data which has been circulated for the meeting to both the commission as well as the applicant and interested parties. As well, that has been reviewed by Ms. Pooley, and she has rendered an opinion on that study that was conducted by the police department, which has also been circulated. So what I'll propose to do is call Mr. Calamaris, excuse me, from the Fairfield Police Department to present that information.
Robert Calamaris, Fairfield Police Captain, Special Services Bureau. The first study that went out was the study that occurred in January of 2019, almost a year prior. And there were some anomalies in that study in which there were some questions as to temperature of the roadway and some of the speeds that were acquired during that. Jim Went, Laura Pooley, Bill Hurley, and Michael Galante and myself met at the police department to discuss basically what kind of information or data we're going to use, and if at all, are we going to eliminate some of the data that was acquired within that study. January 30th, we met to discuss the original speed study, and we all agreed that the information was incorrect as it relates to temperature and speed. I made a call to the company that the devices that we use to do these studies, and there were some software and engineering issues. Not so much as we knew, however, we were concerned that the accuracy, the specificity of the data needed to be pretty specific in order to acquire,
as accurate as you could be.
Exact as we could be, and we noticed that some of the numbers were wrong. So we conducted another speed study using the same devices and maybe tried to move them around in a different location at the request of Mr. Galante.
When was that done?
That was done from January 30th to February 4th. And anytime we get a speed study, we try to cover a couple of days during the week and a couple of days on the weekend to get a good picture of what the volume and the speeds are on that road.
And that you're referring to January 30th, 2020. So
that's correct.
This is about a month, a little more than a month ago, after the first public hearing on this item.
That is correct.
So in my remarks earlier, I mentioned after we adjourned, there was some data collection that took place. That's the data collection that you're referring to now, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
At the conclusion of that study, the same anomalies came up. There was some temperature readings that were going up to 400 and something degrees, and it was just not accurate information. And some of the speeds were in excess of 60 miles an hour. We took that a step further. I had one of my accident reconstructionists come to the scene, and we did what's called a critical speed study, a critical speed calculation on the curve. We were able to get an accurate speed in which a vehicle would not even be able to stay on the roadway if it were traveling at a certain speed. The critical speed for that curve in front of 17 to 21 Beacon View Drive was 58 miles an hour. So anything over 58 miles per hour, a vehicle would not even be able to stay on the road.
And yet you got some readings in excess of that.
That is correct. So we knew that study, Mr. Galante suggested that we go to a radar study, which is the type of study that he did. I, myself, in addition to Laura Pooley, felt that the duration of his study was too short. So I consulted with the Yukon Transportation Safety Unit, which is a conglomerate up at Yukon, which basically assists local towns and municipalities with roadway safety and engineering designs. Melissa Evans from Yukon came down and actually installed the Jamar Black Cat 2 radar device that was used in the final study. And on 2/14, that was put down. It was deployed by Melissa Evans with the assistance of one of my traffic officers. And the 85th percentile in both directions came to 28.5 miles per hour.
Okay, before you get there, it was deployed on 2/14. How long did it stay out?
That stayed out until 2/19.
And
that consisted of a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday was President's Day. Tuesday and Wednesday were regular work days.
right,
So we were able to get a pretty accurate picture of what happens on weekdays and weekends.
excellent. And do you know offhand how many, used in your calculation of the 85th percentile, do you know how many speeds, how many samples of data that you used? How many cars we're talking about?
The study gives you that information. It separates everything into bins.
It's on my phone. I only have it electronically. I don't want to do that right now.
Okay.
I just didn't know if you had it in front of you and you could tell us.
Are you asking for the total volume?
Yeah.
Okay, I can give you that. 3,347 vehicles.
3,000.
347 vehicles.
3,347 vehicles. And how many vehicles was the study that Mr. Galante conducted? Do you know?
I can't answer that.
Okay, well, we'll look at that. I just wanted to, one of the things we're going to have to do is kind of, weigh, right? So to understand the difference. Oh, very good. Please, everyone, thank you. So 3,347 vehicles, thank you. Please continue then.
Unless you have any further questions, I mean, that's ultimately what we did was I provided the study to Mr. Galante. He returned his opinion on the study. And then there was a debate between, actually the debate took place when we met the two times as to whether the engineers were going to use the AASHTO standard or the CONDOT standard, which is basically how conservative are they going to be with reaction time calculations within the 85th percentile of speed, and then that comes up with the sight line that they would be required to fulfill in order to
right.
that get there.
So, did you participate in any analysis of the sightline calculations
I did
based
not.
upon the 85th percentile?
I did not, other than the discussions with the engineers.
Okay.
That was it.
And can you just generally describe the difference between the two standards that are being discussed among the engineers and how that implicates or affects the sightline analysis and the overall safety of the determination?
I'm not an engineer, and so I'll state that for the record. But I kind of understand it's basically a reaction time that it would take a reasonable person to act or see a vehicle and take action on whether they are going to go or not go. I believe that one of the studies is more conservative than the other, the second, as far as the reaction time. And I can't even tell you which one that is.
Sure.
But I know that if you use either the AASHTO calculation or the CONDOT calculation, I can tell you that the number will come up different.
Right, right. So there's a difference. And in your opinion, should we, as a commission assessing the safety of this situation, of this plan, rely on the more conservative calculation or the less conservative calculation to protect the public health and safety?
Well, I would say that you should use the more conservative calculation, but I am not an engineer to maybe answer that question. At the same time, the more conservatives, the more time you have to react in a case where if you saw a vehicle coming.
But in your professional capacity as a public health and safety officer,
I would say the more time, the better.
the more time, the better.
reaction time, the better.
And the safer approach would be to use a more conservative approach.
I would agree with that.
Okay. One of the other things that we're looking at here are restrictions on turning movements, right?
Restrictions on turning what?
Turning movements?
Yes, sir.
Right? So are you familiar with the plan having a restriction exiting the property, no left turn? They can only, the proposal is in order to, because there aren't sufficient sight lines to the left, the proposal is to make it a no left turn exit. That arguably the applicant has structured this, they maintain, such that they can have a proper sight line to the right-hand side, so they'll limit the exiting from the property, a right turn only, okay?
I'm aware of that.
Okay. So what occurred to me was the prospect of a car entering the property from the opposite side of the street, making a left-hand turn into the property, and what the implications are of the sight lines for that vehicle on the roadway. And just from visiting myself, this is not part of any of the presentation materials. From my own observation, it seemed to me that it'd be a pretty unsafe place to be making a left-hand turn into the property from that angle, for the reasons that they're wanting to make it a no left exit. And so, you having spent some time out there, I'm wondering whether you have any observations or comments about that.
I would agree with your assessment in making the left turn would be, if not more dangerous, as dangerous, making a left turn into the complex or the proposed complex. I would also say that spending some time at the site during the study and observing traffic, many of the cars coming off the Park Square Drive roadway tended to skew some of the data, in my opinion. So I feel like the cars that are traveling straight on Beacon View in the direction that someone would have to look from the proposed site to make a right turn out of there, I feel that the slower vehicles coming off of Park Square tend to skew the data, in my opinion.
Skew the data so that the 85th percentile is lower than what it ought to be, given the number, the vehicles traveling on the road in both directions.
That's correct. In other words, where we set up the radar, it's picking up vehicles at a slower speed because they're just accelerating at the time that they turn.
I see. And, interestingly, we're making this assessment of the 85th percentile for the purposes of a right turn movement out of the property, and yet it's now occurring to me that the data collected was the speeds of cars coming in both directions.
Correct.
And it's your opinion that if we isolated the cars only approaching the property on the far side, such the relevant cars that you're looking at when you're seeking to make a right turn out of the property, you're saying if we isolated the data to only those cars, that we would get an 85th percentile speed that's higher than your study.
I'm saying that if you isolated the cars that weren't making a right turn off of Park Square Court, I feel that you would get a higher number, a higher 85th percentile.
Right.
That doesn't make those vehicles turning right off of Park Square Court irrelevant.
No.
It just, in my opinion.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a question on the right turn,
Sure. Commissioner Noonan.
unless I'm interrupting your thoughts.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
As Chair had said, there will be it's being proposed there will be a right turn only out of the project. In your professional capacity, your opinion, your knowledge of the industry, how effective are these bars preventing left-hand turns on a residential street? Do you find that they're followed, or do you find that they are not followed? If you're, excuse me?
What do you mean by bars?
Prohibition.
Prohibitions from taking a left-hand turn. Sorry. Are they effective or not effective? If you're able to say.
I would say it would be dependent on the construction of the curbing that you put in place. If it's very aggressive, it creates an issue where it's more difficult to see. If it's not as aggressive, it creates an issue where people would tend to make a left when they're violating the left turn prohibition.
The curbing meaning kind of sending them to the right as opposed to just a regular driveway where they could go either way except for a sign.
In most cases, they use a curb line to push vehicles in that that one direction, and then in addition to a sign.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Interestingly, in this circumstance, I don't think that there's room for there to be an island at that exit in order for there to be curbing that would actually inspire and direct the cars in that way. Are you familiar with the Sportsplex exit onto Pine Creek, North
I am.
Pine Creek?
The one that everyone makes a left.
Yeah, and that has a curb, which is skewed to direct the traffic to the left with a no right turn, and that curb is now in pieces because it's been traversed so many times by people ignoring the no right turn and the curb and simply riding over it. Not to sort of gild the lily, but that was me talking. In your experience at the Sportsplex where we've made a no right turn, has that been effective in your experience at the Sportsplex?
It's not effective.
Okay. And if people did exit this property, making what would be an illegal left exit out of the property, would that be a dangerous situation?
I think they'd have not only a limited sight distance, but a limited. It would take more reaction time.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? And I think I got I think we have the lay of the land. We'll all have the data. Yeah. Commissioner Gordon.
I'm not sure if this is the time, but someone mentioned somewhere that there are accidents on the road that happen. Like, would you know about that accidents that have
So I
happened
think,
on that
are you
road?
familiar, Mr. Calamars, with the accident history in the vicinity of the property?
I apologize, I was not asked to prepare that, but I could get it, I can get that for the commission if they'd like.
I think
Typically,
that's, yeah, go ahead.
typically, we go back 3 years and look at that data. I mean, that's pretty much an engineering standard, so that's normally what we do. And I can provide the commission with that information.
Okay, that would be great. I do think that Mr. Galante typically includes that in his report, and I just frankly don't have it in front of me at the moment, but, right. Yep, thank you. And we can ask Mr. Galante about that. That's good. Okay, and so I guess I just have one final question, which is that, is it your understanding that using the more conservative approach, given the data that you collected about the 85th percentile speed, that the applicant here does not have the ability to provide adequate sightlines, safe sightlines for exiting the property to the right?
That is my understanding based on the calculation I saw from Engineer Pooley.
Great. Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time in coming down here.
No problem.
Okay. If Attorney Fallon is Mr. Calamars, if you could just wait one moment.
No.
Attorney Fallon.
No, Kevin, that's fine. I just, no
Hey, I saw you motioning. You have, if you have questions.
No, that's not the purpose, no.
Okay.
Captain, I'm fine with your testimony, thank you.
Okay.
I've just got, Mr. Galante's here, but maybe we should exhaust the public comment first, and then, because
So-
he has obviously filed his own,
He has.
so
Yep.
we'll deal with that.
So my plan was to continue with the public comment period, right? So now this has been proffered in response to the applicant's presentation. It's additional evidence for us all to consider. And you've already filed, and I appreciate that, by the way, a response to that, which you can have Mr. Galante address on your rebuttal. Okay? So with that, I'll turn to other public comment. I see Attorney Green is here representing some interested parties. Okay, very good.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, staff. My name is Joel Green. I practice law in Bridgeport. I appear before you this evening on behalf of BV Properties, LLC, who's the owner of the abutting property at 13 Beacon View Drive, which you can see on the site plan. It's basically located right here, right abutting on this side of the property. We appear in opposition to this application this evening. I do have some consultants that I would like to present to the commission. I spoke with Mr. Wendt and with Mr. Fallon earlier. I understand the need to move this along, and I understand the need to allow the public an ample opportunity so that we can close the hearing tonight. It seems to me that coming on the heels of the High Street application, we've spent a lot of time talking about the law and the standards on affordable housing, and I know that the commission, particularly based on your remarks this evening, are well versed on those standards. So what I would propose to do then is just call some consultants, and I'll offer some brief remarks.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. So I would first like to call on Fraser Walsh, who's going to appear before the commission and address specifically, I think this is timely
to. Thank you, everybody, for letting me appear tonight. My name is Fraser Walsh. I'm a civil engineer for a company called Zubik Carr up in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. Appreciate the testimony
Oh,
that
yeah,
you
just
heard.
pull, sorry, just pull that up
Maybe
a
a
little bit.
little
No,
lower.
no, 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 you can pull it up. No, no, you can leave it in the thing.
Okay.
Yeah, you're a big guy.
I'm on a diet, sir. I'm trying.
That's a nice vest, though.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I like that.
So I've been asked tonight to appear before you to offer 2 points for consideration. The first is a quick exhibit that we'll hand around that basically pictorially describes what the sight lines would look like if we use the data gathered by the Yukon study just recently described, of course, by the officer. So I'll hand those around.
Yes, please. If you can just hand the stack right over there, we'll take it in one in the record, and we'll pass the copies around here.
Mr. Welch, if you could just, preliminary to your testimony, if you could just tell the commission a bit about your education, training, and experience, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to need to use the microphone. So, and I caught that. The question was if the witness could please briefly describe his education and background for the record.
Sounds good. I'm a civil engineer. I've been practicing engineering for a little over 20 years, University of Vermont graduate. So again, I'm appearing tonight to offer 2 points for consideration. The first being the exhibit that's in front of you, and that's based on the design speed of 28.5 miles an hour. I guess the second is sort of a continuation of the thought that the commissioner was offering. I was asked to review an assumption made in the letter dated February 24th, 2020, so just yesterday, prepared by the applicant's consultant. And in the letter, the consultant suggests that the field data gathered by the police department and Yukon over a 5-day period between February 14th and the 19th, using a pole-mounted speed sensing device, should be averaged with the data gathered over a 1-hour period using a radar gun, derive an operating speed to calculate the ISD. I guess I'm suggesting, based on the information provided, that 120 hours of data collection adds a little more weight than a 1-hour study.
Yeah, how many cars were in the other study?
It's my understanding it was 40.
40? And were any of those thrown out? You know, outliers, top, bottom?
That I'm not aware of, sir.
Okay. So it's your opinion that the two should not be averaged because a study over the course of
5 days.
5 days of 3,347 cars is more statistically significant
Correct.
than a 1-hour study of 40 cars.
Correct.
And that even if there was some combination of those two data compilations, that they be somehow they should be reconciled.
Average weight, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
weighted, given the disparity in the data.
Correct.
If I may just follow up on that question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you gotta use the mic. Thank you.
If I may, and would it be fair to say that there are times when, in any given day, hours, statistically, when traffic moves more quickly, for example, during rush hours, as opposed during, when traffic moves more quickly during, say,
Pull it down.
rush
Just pull it
hours,
down.
or
Yeah.
during, as opposed to, say, 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning or on a Sunday afternoon, so that this broader sampling provides a much more reliable result, and just plugging in 1 hour as an average would improperly skew that average.
That's correct, sir.
All right. And can you just comment for the commission, based on this drawing that you've produced, and maybe you can just go through this drawing and highlight what it shows and what the result is, and I'll ask you some follow-up questions.
Sure. So let's, if you don't mind. So again, before you, we used a document out of the application as the starting point. And as you can see, the solid line within the red area was the original, looks like sight line distance. So using the modified 85th percentile number, does everybody have one? Great. You can see the greater impact from a stop coming out of the proposed development to the ability to see to the left cars coming down Beacon View.
And so, as a result, is it your opinion then that based on this study and based on this site distance, that this does not present a safe configuration as to the sight line when attempting to take a right turn?
Yes.
And I have nothing further for this witness. I don't know if the commission has questions.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. So I haven't done the math. Maybe you have. If you did weight the average between the studies, would there be enough of a difference in the 85th percentile speed to come within either one of the competing standards to provide adequate sight lines for a right turn out of this site?
You're talking about basically a 1% impact or influence.
Mm-hmm.
So you could argue mathematically that it's a very little change.
Mm-hmm. And that very little change in the 85th percentile of the new data would mean that regardless of which standard the applicant sought to use in determining the sight lines that would be appropriate, it's your professional opinion that they can't meet that safety standard.
No, sir. What we're talking about is what the speed should be when we're doing those calculations. So if we're using the DOT data, then yes, the ISD is approximately 314 feet.
Okay.
As shown in that exhibit.
Okay. You familiar with the applicant's assessment of the sight lines using the two different standard at the AASHTO and
ASHTO report.
Yes.
That's the letter that I believe was dated yesterday. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So part of the argument that's being made here is that not only do we have an average, or they're proposing to average the studies, which you've spoken to, and I think everybody's clear about that. There are two guidelines which are referenced here. So let's start with your understanding of the difference between the two guidelines. Do you have an understanding?
So as you stated previously, one is more conservative than the other. And it's my understanding that the town engineer suggested that we use the DOT, the more conservative of the two.
Okay. And in your professional work, do you use
We typically use the DOT design manual, yes, sir.
Okay. And so, given your testimony about the weight to be accorded any averaging of these of the data here, which you say is marginal, 1% or so, is it your testimony that they can't meet the sight lines under the CONDOT guidelines?
They can't meet the site, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Is the same true under the AASHTO guidelines?
You have to forgive me, I don't remember the results of the ASHTO calculation offhand. We really just looked at the DOT numbers.
Okay. Okay.
And just so we're clear, I understand this averaging discussion, but as I understand Mr. Welch's
Use the microphone.
I'm sorry. I understand the discussion that the applicant has put into play on using averaging of the two data gathering, two collections of data. But as I understand Mr. Welch's testimony, and you can correct me, that would not be appropriate to use that averaging. That is his testimony. Is that correct? Yes, sir.
Yes. And thank you very much for the clarification. I understood that to be the case. I was just trying to assess all the permutations. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Levy.
We've heard a lot about the different numbers. Talking about public health and safety and avoiding accidents. By my calculation, a car going at 28.5 miles per hour is doing about 41 feet per second. Is that about right? If you know?
Can I pull up my calculator? I'll take your word for it.
Okay. When you're talking about sight lines, are you concerned about the driver that's exiting and having ample opportunity to determine whether it's safe to exit? Are you concerned about the stopping distance, reaction time, and braking time of the oncoming vehicle? Or are you concerned about both? I mean, what are the safety concerns, forgetting the numbers, just in terms of an operator and how that correlates with these numbers?
Yeah, you're thinking about the operator making that right or left-hand turn and being able to react to what's coming.
Okay, so being able to evaluate whether or not it's safe to exit.
Correct.
Okay, and in terms of the stopping distance and reaction time of the oncoming vehicle, is that a concern or not?
That's always a concern, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And can you just comment that on the, once again, I understand that this is a standard that's established by the DOT in its highway design manual, but this lack of adherence to this standard creates a probability of harm for drivers on Beacon View, or more accurately, in response to the question, a probability of harm for drivers trying to take a right turn from the site. Is that correct?
How do I respond to that, Joel? The intent with the design criteria is to create as safe a condition as possible for all operators. So you're trying to limit the potential. So to answer your question, I think, yes, that's the goal, is to reduce the probability of an accident.
And based on that standard, then, a design that does not adhere to that standard is unsafe based on that standard.
To make that logical leap, yes.
I have nothing further to witness.
Okay. Anyone else? Good. Okay, thank you very much.
Next, I would like to call on Steve Trinkus of Trinkus Engineering, who's here this evening. And he has a report. He does have a report. And I provided a copy to Attorney Fallon also.
Good evening, Steve Trinkus for the record. I can put the microphone down because I am not tall. No, I didn't.
Can you, Mr. Trinkus, I know that the commission is familiar with you based on the High Street application, but if you could just tell the commission a bit about your education, training, and experience, just so that the record is complete.
I have an undergraduate degree in actually forest management from the University of New Hampshire. I became a licensed PE in Connecticut in 1988. I got my Maryland license 3 years ago in 17. I've done land development work for close to 40 years in the state of Connecticut, and I'm an expert in low-impact development, which focuses on water quality and runoff volumes primarily, because those are the big problems that we're seeing in stormwater today. My review of the plans was technical in nature. I will leave the traffic to the people more qualified than I am to talk about that. While there's issues with the erosion control plan of missing information, the primary focus is on stormwater management. The applicant at the current time proposes 2 underground detention systems. They're a type of plastic gallery system instead of concrete. They have a couple different issues with them. They're proposing 2 online hydrodynamic separators. And when we mean online is that all the drainage goes through the separator. There's not a bypass. These systems are designed to have what's called the water quality flow, which is a flow rate associated with 1 inch rain or the water quality volume. And the idea is that the dirtiest water, which is the first inch of runoff, goes through the treatment system. All the other runoff is bypassed around it, and then you go to the detention system. When it's an offline configuration, the removal efficiency of total suspended solids or very fine sediments is around 75%. When it's in an online configuration as proposed, that efficiency drops down to about 30%. This was documented over numerous years of research at the New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, and is available in their annual reports, which are online. So from a water quality standpoint, the Connecticut DEP has a goal that all of us design engineers are to meet, which is an 80% reduction in total suspended solids. If you're only removing 30, obviously you're going to be short of that standard. The underground detention systems on this particular site, the applicant had dug several test pits. Restrictive soil layers and/or modeling, which indicates seasonal groundwater, was encountered in all of them. The 2004 DEP manual requires that from the bottom of an infiltration practice, which these are not an underground bathtub, is to have a 3-foot separation between the bottom of your system and seasonal groundwater. For these two systems, that standard is not anywhere close to being met. For what's called SMS1, which is the system to the rear of the building, that actually, the bottom of it is about 1.5 feet below seasonal groundwater. So you're not going to get any infiltration if you're into a saturated zone. That would be this system here. SMS2, which is to the side of the building, the separation between the bottom of the stone layer and seasonal groundwater is 1/10 foot, basically that much, well short of 3 feet. The reason the separation is there is to provide an unsaturated zone for water to infiltrate. Water will not infiltrate into a saturated zone. There's no way for it to move that way. In the DEP manual, there's numerous sections for different stormwater practices, and under the infiltration gallery systems, it's one of the last sections, it gives you some basic standards, but it also refers you back to infiltration practices, which are also infiltration basins and trenches. So the vertical separation requirement and other design requirements are in that section, and Attorney Green has, I believe, some excerpts from that particular manual. The applicant also used percolation tests done from the ground surface, done between 30 and 42 inches, to then get an infiltration rate. Well, a perk test measures both vertical and lateral movement of water. We're only looking for vertical movement of water in the design, so the perk test effectively overestimates the vertical infiltration rate, and it's not a simple conversion. I've done a lot of online research with this, and there's many states with many different approaches to converting a perk rate to an infiltration test. 3 of them that I found, Michigan, City of San Diego, and one of the smaller cities outside Denver, they have a conversion which is relatively similar, and basically the percolation rates on this site were either 1 inch in 20 minutes or 3 inches per hour, or 1 inch in 40, which is, about 1.5 inches per hour, very slow rates. Using the San Diego conversion factor, basically puts these rates at 0.18 or 0.36 inches per hour, which is the 0.18 is below the minimum standard of 0.3 in the DEP manual, and the 0.36 is just above that minimum standard. But when we design infiltration practices, you take 50% of that value. The applicant used 1 inch. So if we have 0.18, we're actually using 0.09, or you could round it to 0.1. That's 1/10 of what the applicant used. So 2 things are going to happen. A, if water does infiltrate, it's going to infiltrate way slower than the applicant assumes. Secondly, these underground galleries are, think of it as a box, basically. The applicant has a 4-inch pipe coming out of the side of the box to go to the drainage pipe that goes out to Beacon View Drive. Well, the 4-inch pipe is not set at the bottom. It's set about midway on the sidewall. So the storage between the bottom of the 4-inch pipe and the bottom of the gallery, from a hydraulic design perspective, that is not available volume, because that pipe will set the water surface. They're claiming they have this much volume. In reality, they have this much. If you don't have the volume because you have a permanent pool in your underground detention system, two things happen. One, you're not going to detain the water and meet the town standards of zero increase. But two, if you get a short, intense rainstorm event, you don't have the capacity for that water to fit in the stormwater system. And if that's the case, just like filling your bathtub, water fills up and spreads out. Because this site is virtually a dead level site from a hydraulic perspective, that water will flow back out of the catch basins and spread out and possibly go on adjacent properties depending on the particular storm event. So again, similar to High Street, the system looks nice on paper. It simply doesn't work in reality with the standards that we have to use as design engineers. Again, the storm scepter units are sized to the water quality flow. There was no calculation for that. So without knowing the rate, we don't know if the units proposed by the applicant are appropriately sized for that. There's a lot of missing invert information on the plans. There's some pipes and slopes, but you don't know what the elevations are. And again, if there's elevations are not there, you can't determine whether the system will actually work or not. In the parking, under building parking, there's a catch basin basically in the center of the underground or the under building parking, but there's no grades around that parking area to direct the water to that basin. So if you have a under building area that's dead level and you have a basin in the middle, the water's never going to get there. The water has to have pitch to drain to the catch basins, and there's no information to know if that's going to be the case. If that's not the case, then the water is simply going to spread out under the building as far as that goes. Based on the proposed sanitary sewer connection with an existing drain line in Beacon View, based on, again, the information available on the plan, the sewer line is going to be in conflict with the drainage pipe. So it's going to run smack into it. So it can't be built the way it's proposed. The detail for the gallery system also proposes a geotextile fabric. There's many different kinds of geotextile. The use of them is that they're more prone to clogging. And if you've got this under the system on top of the stone, if that clogs, how do you restore the infiltrative capacity if it is going to infiltrate? And how do you fix it? You have to fix it by digging up the entire system. So again, it's problematic from a maintenance standpoint, but the biggest concern is you don't have a separation to groundwater to allow the water to infiltrate. And the design is based heavily on the fact that you will get infiltration occurring.
Mr. Trinkus, if I could ask you a few questions. The detention...
Yeah, you need to like pull the microphone up. I know you think you're speaking loudly, but we can't hear you. The people at home can't hear you.
All right, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Trinkus, the detention or the infiltration features that you're talking about are highlighted in blue on this drawing. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And can you just tell the commission what are these? Are these just box chambers of some sort?
They're a proprietary product. They're basically a plastic box that is pretty much perforated on all sides, and they kind of interlock together like Legos. However, they're not solid walls. So they're kind of stackable open blocks. Instead of a typical concrete gallery or Cultec, it's a new stormwater product.
And so, for example, when you talk about the groundwater, if the surface of that table was the bottom of that chamber, then there's that 3-foot area underneath it, and that would be soil. And if I understand your testimony correctly, the DEP manual requires that there be 36 inches of soil that does not have groundwater normally up in it. Is that correct?
That is correct, because you need to have an unsaturated zone because you're adding water to it. The water needs to go somewhere, and it has to have a unsaturated zone to move into the soil.
And if the water is, as you describe in the plan, if the water is higher than the floor in my example, and if there's water up to some point closer to the table, it does not have the capacity to receive stormwater that it's designed to receive.
Yeah, as proposed, the approximately half of the depth of the stormwater system would have a ponded water surface within it, so you only have half the storage volume that the applicant is claiming. Therefore, all of the conclusions of zero increase and compliance with the Fairfield regulations go out the window, because the storage is basically half of what is being proposed, in reality is half of what the applicant's proposing.
If I may, I just want to provide the commission with some excerpts from the stormwater manual that Mr. Trinkus can just highlight so that the commission sees where these requirements are in the manual. And so the first document I am submitting is a document entitled Infiltration Practices, and I have an original and copies for the commission. And the second document is called Underground Infiltration Systems, and I'm submitting that to the commission as well. And I'll just take a moment so that the commission can receive them, and I'd like to give Mr. Fallon a copy as well. I recognize this is a lot of material, but I think Mr. Trinkus can direct the commission to the page and the feature.
Steve Trinkus again. If we start with actually the underground infiltration systems, the shorter of the two documents, on the second page under design considerations, the first paragraph towards the bottom, it says, the reader should refer to the infiltration practices for additional information on siting, design, construction. So that's why it refers back. But what's also appropriate here is it says under design volume, underground infiltration structures should be designed again as offline practices. So that again means water quality volume going to that system, the other flow going somewhere else. And the reason for that typically is you don't want to discharge pollutants into your shallow groundwater or to the soils on your site. So you want adequate treatment, and then you have detention beyond that.
Let me ask a question. In your opinion, what is the probability of this system failing in the way that you're describing?
Very high. This site is not a site that I would propose infiltration on.
Very high. Can you give us any better estimate of the probability that the infiltration system will fail in the manner that you're describing in a number?
I believe it would fail probably within a year after installation, because you're not going to infiltrate the water and you don't have the storage volume required, so you're going to get excess discharges to the town system, thus not being in compliance with the zero increase requirement.
And if the system fails and the water doesn't infiltrate and is now spilling onto the property, where's that water going to go?
Some of it may stay in the parking lot. Some might, depending on the depth and the grading of the lot, go to an adjacent property, because the adjacent properties are both relatively flat.
Have you looked at the topography?
Yes, I have. I drove by the site.
Okay. And in your professional opinion, if these systems fail and that water is not infiltrated and it overflows, where is the water going to go?
The water is going to seek its own level. It's going to spread out, again, depending on if the intensity of the rainstorm. If we go back sometime this winter when we had the ice storm where pretty much everything was frozen solid and you have rain, you would be putting nuisance flooding on the adjacent flat properties.
And therein lies the rub of my question. Nuisance flooding. Is it your professional opinion that any of the issues that you're describing with this system will have a substantial impact on the public health, safety, and welfare?
It is. If my property does not flood today and I get flooding where I can't use my yard, that's an issue.
Please describe for me how a failure of this system will impact the public health, safety, and welfare.
Okay. If the system fails and the water comes out the tops of the drains, which is what it'll want to do, it will likely, again, fill up the parking lot to a point where it starts draining to either adjacent properties or drains onto Beacon View Drive. Water flowing across Beacon View Drive during the winter can ice up, and if somebody does not see it at night, you have a safety hazard.
What is your estimation of the probability that this infiltration system will fail, the water will overflow, it will spill out onto the street, it will freeze, and people traveling at an average speed of 28.5 miles per hour on this street will have an accident?
At any time, not just this month or this year, but at any time.
Well, my question was with respect to the wintertime months that he's describing as having an especially, maybe not this winter, but an especially likelihood of water on the road freezing.
There's many variables, but it's my opinion if the system does not infiltrate and fills up, you will get discharges and you will create a hazard. It depends on the intensity of the rainstorm event, and again, how long the rain lasts. But if the system does not infiltrate, there will be a discharge. But if it's 40 degrees out, you will have water on the road, which to me is also an issue. But if it's 25 out, said water will also freeze.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Trinkus, the reason I was asking about the time scope of the question is, do you have any doubt whatsoever that condition, maybe not in 2020, maybe not in 2021, but in the next few years, can you say with certainty, 100%, that condition will occur?
I believe that condition will occur when the right weather conditions are present, and it could be any time in the future. Again, as the chairman noted, we have not had a lot of snow this year, but other years we've had. But again, the water has nowhere to go, and it will go up the only direction. It will fill up and overflow because that's where it wants to go. It's going to seek its own level.
And I appreciate the diligence and the technical nature of the work that you've done here. What we need to assess is whether the problems that you've identified rise to such a level and a probability that those issues will substantially affect the public health and safety. And we need to, well, we don't need to, the relevant inquiry is whether the conditions that you've described will substantially impact public health and safety, and if so, how, right? Icing up on the road causing a safety problem for motorists on the road, infiltration of contaminants into the groundwater affecting the safety of our water supply, things like that. Nuisance flooding, while is incredibly bad, and I don't want anybody here to think that I'm at all countenancing nuisance flooding, but nuisance flooding under the statute doesn't cut it, right? We need to understand if this is to be at all, of any impact on our time, I need to understand why this is significant in the context of this application.
In my professional opinion, the inappropriate and inadequate design of the stormwater management system poses that exact risk that you're talking about, because the discharge of water, when I'm not supposed to have a discharge onto a roadway, whether it's warm or cold out, does create a safety hazard. A couple years ago, I was actually coming down 395 in eastern Connecticut, and first time in my life, hydroplaned in a thunderstorm. Extremely scary situation when you lose control of your car. on the road. And it wasn't raining that hard, but there was a low spot in the road that wasn't very apparent and enough water ponded that we went for a ride. So again, water on the road creates the safety issue. That in and of itself is a risk to public safety. It doesn't have to freeze, but it's there. And again, it's a condition that does not exist today. So even if you travel that area, you know, you may hit this, again, at night when you don't know what's there, and it is a risk.
And as you're aware, this is at a bend in the road. There's a bend in the road. You've heard the data on traffic, and that supports your conclusion that there's a certainty of that harm.
Yes, I would agree with that. Not to-
Where will the water leave the property? Will it be at the driveway exit?
It would, one of the other issues I have with the plans, there wasn't enough spot elevations on the proposed plan to tell me exactly where all the water was going. I cited that because it's unclear how the water is going to get to the catch basins on site. It would likely want to go out either the entrance or the exit driveway because those are pitching down to the roadway.
So, okay. Thank you.
That's it.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm sorry.
There's a curb around the site, so it wouldn't necessarily go that way unless there was some blockage. The other document Attorney Green submitted, the infiltration practices, this, I'm not going to go into, but this has all the specific design references that I talked about.
Thank you.
Question.
Commissioner Noonan.
You had mentioned that you would not recommend an infiltration system on this site. Do you have a recommendation as to what should have been used, or what should be designed?
There's not a lot of room to do anything else. The only type of system you could possibly do is some type of underground system that is with a liner where you're not trying for infiltration. You're basically building an underground bathtub to attain peak rate attenuation. But you're also sacrificing some water quality benefits with that type of system.
Is that putting it into the sewer system?
No, you're basically, think of your bathtub, putting a plastic sheet in your bathtub and then filling it up. You're basically, the bathtub is the soil, you're putting an impermeable liner between that and your gallery, so you're building an underground bathtub that's basically in a plastic box, so water cannot infiltrate, it just can be stored and then metered out. That's
Metered out to where? Just into the...
Well, it would eventually go to the system on Beacon View, but you'd have to design a different outlet structure. You know.
But the sewer system on Beacon?
The storm drainage system.
Drainage,
You have separate systems here in Fairfield.
Sorry.
And this is a concept, Mr. Trinkus, based on the applicant's application and the data that they've provided, are you able to even offer that opinion that that is possible based on the lack of subsurface data?
You know, it may not be completely feasible. Again, the site is flat. To get the storage volume, you'd need a lot more galleries, and I don't know if you'd have adequate room. There are galleries that come from 1 foot tall to 4 foot tall, but again, that has to be designed by the applicant's engineer.
And not to state the obvious, but this condition arises as a result of the amount of impervious surface that the applicant proposes based on the size of this application on this half-acre site. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. It's virtually pavement edge to edge.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm providing the commission with an excerpt, a portion of a survey, just to show the proximity of the home on my client's property. And it is 17 and a half feet off the property line. And I offer that because the applicant in their drawing did not offer in their site plan or in any of their proposed development documents sort of the proximity of structures proximate to the proposed development. As you're aware, the building is built very close to the property line. If you look at the elevations of the drawing, you will see that the applicant proposes to place 20 air conditioning compressors right next to the home that is shown on the survey. Commissioner, bear with me for one moment. In the, I'm sorry, in the, I note on the plan that the compressors are shown right here on the property line next to the building. I don't have an expert to provide the testimony that having 20 air conditioning compressors next to your home where you sleep is necessarily, I don't have expert testimony on that. There is law to the effect that sometimes some conditions are beyond the need for an expert where it is obvious and known to normal people, and you don't need tremendous training and experience. That speaks for itself. So I would just, I'm just offering that, and I was sort of surprised that the applicant didn't show the proximity, at least, of a structure. I note that some of the town zoning requirements require that site plans, for example, show 50 feet of contour off a site and that sort of thing, and I think that is an interesting feature, and I'm just pointing that out. So just briefly, and I'm not going to take up a lot more time, but you know, there were some interesting comments by the commission during the High Street plan, specifically relating to the lack of any sort of open space feature on the site. And in fact, I believe that in the discussion, some of the commissioners made reference to the fact that it's unhealthy to not have a playground or a play area or some green space. And certainly this site offers none of that. It is worse than the High Street site, which by virtue of wetlands on that site, there had to be some green space. This site offers none. I note once again that the applicant submitted code review notes with the application, and I just think that
You actually just reminded me of a question that I had for Mr. Trinkus, and I forgot to ask. Did Ms. Pooley review the engineering plan? And what was her opinion?
she had, well, in the code review notes?
Yeah. Yeah, well, or otherwise. I just, I don't have, yeah, I don't have a recollection of what Ms. Pooley's review of the engineering plan was. Did she approve it? Did she have recommendations? Or did she agree with Mr. Trinkus that this would fail? It's not, you're not,
Well,
I understand.
Is the document, I don't have, is the document in the record at this time?
It is, yeah. And if
So-
that's the case, then it speaks for itself. And we don't have
I
to
think
belabor
it does, but
Okay.
I do want to bring to the commission's attention, and I think And whenever I see Laura Pooley, I call her Laura Pooley Says, because I point out to her that whenever I'm in front of any board body or commission, people say Laura Pooley Says, and we get a big laugh out of that. And I said, they said that you said, and I always say Laura Pooley Says when I see her. But I'd like to bring to the commission's attention Section 7159B of the Connecticut General Statutes. That's 7159B of the Connecticut General Statutes. Siri.
That's, really? Okay. Are you upstaging me or what?
And it says, and I just think this is important, and just for the benefit of the public, I have a copy for the commission and for council, and it's short, but I think it's valuable to get this into the record of an application, because I think, unfortunately, sometimes code review is an opportunity for everyone to speak openly, freely, but it's always preliminary, and I'm struck by the number of times the applicant says, well, under code review, everything looked great. And I just think it's important to note that 7159B says, notwithstanding any other provision of the general statutes, prior to the submission of an application for use of property under chapters 124, 126, 440, and 541, and you know chapter 124 is zoning, or any other provision of the general statutes authorizing an authority, commission, department, or agency of a municipality to issue a permit or approval for such use of property, such authority, commission, department, or agency, or authorized agent thereof may separately, jointly, or in any combination conduct a pre-application review of a proposed project with the applicant at the applicant's request. Such pre-application review and any results or information obtained from it may not be appealed under any provisions of the general statutes and shall not be binding on the applicant or any authority, commission, department, agency, or other official having jurisdiction to review the project. And I just want that to be in the record, and I think it's an important provision to take note and keep mind of in the future, and I wanted to use this opportunity. Moving on this application, I note that, and as the commission is aware, there is a balancing test where you balance the need for affordable housing with the safety concerns that are presented. My first take on that, and I always point out, is that everyone deserves to live in a safe place, and I know this commission is cognizant of that. I would submit that the applicant in this case, their affordability plan, one that I've seen many times before in a number of applications, is a bit outdated and really goes back so many years in terms of what it presents. And I think that we have made progress in this town. Do we have a long way to go? We do, and certainly we all recognize the need to have housing that's affordable in Fairfield, but once again, the data that the applicant presented, I think, is pretty unimpressive on the need, just based on the record here. In terms of the sightline argument that we heard, I am always suspicious of a plan where on a road like Beacon View, a development is so intense that you can't even have a left turn out of a site. And a development is set up and designed in a way that you can't have a left turn out. It's unnatural. And I think, while I understand that we can't talk about mere possibilities and certainties, and it's hard to do that with left turns, and I know that the commission did ask questions this evening that went to that, I just think it's a terrible precedent having right turn only developments, because we all know that, as we've seen on South Pine or North Pine Creek, it happens routinely. It's of note to me that the police department got involved in this application. I don't see that on a lot of applications. That says to me that there is a real problem here, and I thought that the testimony was really compelling and terrific. And I think that based on the testimony, I would say that the balancing and the findings that this commission has to make are really well supported by the evidence that was produced by the Fairfield Police Department, the evidence produced, and I will say, by Laura Pooley on the traffic issue, and certainly on the flooding issue. I appreciate the probing and really informative questions that the commission asked. Once again, I think that this application presents a project that is just so intense and such an overuse of a small site, and I think that there's an ample evidentiary basis for this commission to deny the application. I urge you to do that, and I appreciate your patience in hearing me. I don't know if you have any questions for me at this point.
Thank you, Attorney Green. Does anyone have any final questions from Attorney Green? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any other member of the public wish to be heard? Hi there.
Wow, my pen is still here from January 28th. My name is Paula Gallo. I live at 23 Beacon View, which is right adjacent to 1521 on the other side. And for the record, my backyard floods, and my backyard is the low area of, where the water probably would go if there's any overflow, if it goes into the backyard. Further, I have mold challenges already in my house, and the sump pumps are already working. I also share a wall with Mr. Palak's tenants, and so I put a vapor barrier in the basement. I put Sani-Dry in the basement, and I've got 2 sump pumps working down there all the time, currently now. The other reason I'm up here is because I wanted to read testimonies from 2 neighbors that can't be here. Is that all right?
Sure. If you have it in writing, you can submit it.
I do.
Yeah, if you would like to.
Okay. Well, I can definitely do that.
It's either way.
One is from Kathy Sheffer. She's across the street at 14, in front of 1517. And the other is from Muriel Schultz, who taught here for many, many years, and maybe you were some of her students. So, and hers is handwritten. I do have scans of these, so if you want them electronically as well, but I'm happy to submit them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Of course. Are you represented with the applicant?
Myself.
Very good.
My name is Erwin Markovic. I live in 14 Bloomfield Drive. 14 Bloomfield Drive. That's my house. And I don't see why he cannot build this house there, because really all these water problems, or there are water problems already there, so they have a problems anyway. And they're gonna help to store some water out anyway, but they build or they're gonna have a garage on the basement, and you guys anyway see the plans, and they already did the drawing to see how the best is to prevent the water from the property. Anyway, we need some changes, and all these old houses, and it just don't make sense no more. I don't see the issue from a lot of cars. It's everybody has a driveway. Everybody walks left or right, or so I don't see the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you. This woman, people are now starting a line. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Maureen Fontaine. I've been a 25-year resident in this area. I'm an avid walker, and sorry, what? I've been an avid walker. I walk children Monday through Friday daily in the neighborhood. I've just noticed, my observation is that since the 3 affordable housing developments have been built or increased, that there has been an increase in traffic in the neighborhood. My primary concern is children going to the park right down the street, walking to the park. There are no sidewalks. I avoid that right side where this proposal is with the children for safety reasons. And I'm afraid that with the cars going out the right and around the neighborhood, they're going to go right past the park, right where all the children go to the park or parents bring the children. So I'm concerned about the safety in terms of that.
Thank you. I got you. You're next.
Sharon Pastilli, RTM District 3, but this proposed development is a couple of blocks outside of my district, so I'm here, as a concerned neighbor. I also am an avid walker. I think we actually cross each other quite a bit. I have a dog who loves to walk on Beacon View and around Pine Tree and back out to Black Rock Turnpike. And it's definitely unsafe already because there's very little off-street parking. Most of the houses in that neighborhood have either one car garage or no garage, and so there's already cars on the street. So when I try to walk with my dog, I'm either walking like all the way on somebody's lawn, or I'm walking out into the street where people come flying around. It's incredibly unsafe. Like, I live off Burroughs Road. This is more unsafe than Burroughs Road, if you can imagine that. And the other issue is I don't know the guidelines for a traffic study, but I do have 20 years of background in data analysis in HR, and what I would like to see is a traffic study that only comes from the other direction of Beacon View and not from, I can't remember the name of the other street, but I know what it looks like, the little cut-through street. If you only take the traffic data from the faster side and array that and leave the slower traffic out of the analysis, because there is a huge difference. And the other thing to consider is if you only did a traffic study from 7:10 to 7:35 and only did a traffic study from 2:02 to 2:25, you'd see something insane. Because my entire neighborhood, from Jennings, Fairfield Woods, that whole area, uses that as a cut-through to get to Ward. And it's crazy. It is not safe, and it's already way overdeveloped. So I'm hoping that you will find sufficient evidence in terms of health and safety to deny the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Good evening, everybody. I was here at the last meeting. I'm just trying to wrap around in my head, trying to figure out, the reasons for and against this project. I think what we've discussed is there's a unit, though, with 20 units. It's crammed in a very small area. They don't have enough parking on the property itself, so they want to use 5 spaces from the street. I think anybody with common sense, though, that any unit that you have, you're probably going to have 2 people in that unit. Going to have a partner or a spouse, which would involve 2 cars. I don't know what the zoning in this town is, though, but 20 cars or 20 units is not very reasonable. They lack parking to begin with, and now we're looking at probably more cars being on the street that can't accommodate that volume. I think we've talked about the air conditioners also, disturbing the neighbors next door. We've talked about flooding. As a matter of fact, Paula Gallo, her backyard floods all the time. I think it's unconscionable when somebody can sit there and say flooding is not a statute and it's okay. If you want to talk about, safety hazards, though, there's possibilities of Nile virus or whatever, because those things, there's no way for that water to go. As far as the right turn, there is no sight to that street. The area itself, Beacon View, is a very large oval, and it takes about 3/4 of a mile. If you take a right, you have to go through that oval to get to Black Rock Turnpike. Add another 5 minutes to your commute. I can't think of anybody that would take a right turn just because the sign says turn right. I think everybody's going to turn left. It's only common sense. As far as the traffic goes, if you look at this population over here, everyone is here is elderly. I think everybody here probably goes about 25, 30 miles an hour going those streets. Ward High School is right next door. The young lady over here is absolutely correct. When these kids rush for school, there's, I don't know, 1,800 people at Ward High School. When you think of people that can have cars, what's that? The age limit is 15 to 18. So 16, 17, 18, sophomore, junior, and senior years, a lot of them would have cars. If everybody had a car, it'd be 1,300 cars. I don't think everybody has a car, but that's a lot of cars, though, that have to pass through that street and make their way to school. I know I was a kid. I never followed the speed limit. I'm not proud of it, but that's just one of those things. All it takes is one idiot to go and do damage. We're talking about a street that comes from Black Rock Turnpike, and then it turns right onto the property to Beacon View. But Beacon View is a very large oval. You can also come to from Miro, and there's no turns involved, so it's just, basically it's a straightaway. So you don't need to stop it at a corner and make a turn. Like I said, the speed is very, very fast in those areas. I have a house there for 15 years. I have a sump pump that goes 24 hours a day. When it stops, the basement floods. I have to replace it right away. The water table is extremely high there, and there's a heck of a lot of flooding throughout the whole neighborhood. We have just spoken to somebody who's an expert and says now that the unit's going to fail in a year. I don't know what else you people need to hear. It really is unconscionable. I have a unit across the street. All the houses there are one-story bricks or two-story houses. They were all built in 1950. These are for the people that helped with the armed services during World War II. It's a very, very mild neighborhood, and we have a lot of construction. We have now about 100 apartments there. About 75 or 70 is elderly and also for affordable housing. The units coming up now are very, very expensive. The value of my house is probably about $350. It's a duplex. That's for both sides. If you buy half a duplex, it ranges between $150 to $190. To me, that's very, very affordable, especially for Fairfield. The units that are coming up now, the unit across the street, my roof line goes up to 25 feet. That roof line is up to 50 feet. There's 8 units in there. The value of the house, the estimate is around $380,000 per apartment. That's at Bloomfield Commons. There's also Canfield townhouses, and those units go for about $400,000. So you may throw in 3 or 4 units for affordable housing, though, but you're pricing a lot of people out of that neighborhood. It's a wonderful neighborhood. As you can see, we're all solid citizens. We brought our families there, and we just want to keep it that way. Across the street, I have this townhouse, as I just explained. There's a one-story brick building to the right of it, and I don't know, the guy is from Pizza Palace owns it, and he's waiting for financing because he's going to knock down the 2 houses next to it and extend his property. And I just think somewhere along the line we have to put a stop to this. I'm begging you guys to just please look at the numbers, and also, but also for the safety reasons, and also try to maintain some of the property we have there, and our standard of living. It's not very highfalutin, but we do enjoy it. It's a neighborhood. People walk, people talk. This influx, though, is starting to change the neighborhood. Hopefully, this will add some light to your decision. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Can I get your name? I didn't catch your name.
My name is Herman Lammerts, Lammerts. I live at 15 Bloomfield Drive.
Thank you. Appreciate
it, my friend.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Josh Garskoff. I live on 87 Sachem Road. I am a member of the RTM for District 5, which is this district. I've spent some time on this road, and as everyone in this room knows, it's not a safe road to building a big project like this on. It is not probably safe as it stands right now without the project. I've almost been hit by a car on this road. It's walking around parked cars on the road when sometimes high schoolers, sometimes other people are zipping around the corner there is not safe. I also wanted to comment that flooding is very much a health and safety factor. Flooding is pollution. Flooding is potential mold in neighboring buildings. Flooding is allergies for people with allergic reactions. Flooding is damage to houses. We've had so much flooding in this town lately. I think we all know that flooding is a health and safety factor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Jay Wolk. I'm an RTM member in District 5 also. I'm here to support my neighbors, and that's why I'm here. I can ditto what Josh, Representative Glasscoff just said. It is an unsafe road. I'm hearing from the board. First of all, I want to thank all you guys for just letting us speak. Hearing that children are involved in a road that, now that the police department's here involved in worrying of their safety, this is a concern for me. It is my neighborhood. We have issues all over the neighborhood with safety issues, with children walking on the street. When I'm hearing of Representative Pastilli saying that she's walking on the street with her dog, and now she has to go into the middle of the street. We've had issues around town, and that is a concern. So I just want to thank you, and again, I'm here for support for declining this project. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir? Who's?
Good evening. My name is Kevin Muller. I've lived in this neighborhood for over 60 years. That's a long time. And I've seen the traffic go to this neighborhood, especially after school. The school buses use it for a cut-through. They don't drop off any kids there, they just use it for a cut-through. They go down Bloomfield, they also go down, not Campfield Drive, and they also go past this property. I wish they wouldn't, but unfortunately it's public streets. If they wanted to put also, like they did on Bloomfield Drive, the fair housing project that was done by Turk recently, and on Campfield Drive, I thought that was done very tastefully. I wish a lot of this housing, war housing, that has no basements because of the high water table, I wish a lot more of this housing would be torn down. This particular neighborhood is known as a low-income rental neighborhood. A lot of people don't even live there that own property there. All they do is interested in renting it out, sucking the money out of the people, and not putting nothing back into the neighborhood. I'm one of those few that put money back into my houses. I've owned a few houses in that neighborhood. What Sammy is trying to do, I wish everybody would work. I think you're being very unfair to him to a certain point. I understand the water situation. I've grown up in that neighborhood, even before the senior housing was there. I understand how a high water table is there. When I was a child, I used to play back there, which used to go to McKinley School. And that area used to flood out. They put a huge pipe in there back in the 60s, which was supposed to have helped the situation. But now the conservative people in Fairfield, save the frogs, they don't want to ever clean that pipe out, and it runs in the back of McKinley School. And it goes out to Knapp's Park Drive there. That whole area is very hard pan clay, and it doesn't let the soil drain. I think what Sammy's trying to do with the Coltex, I'm quite familiar with all the aspects of building. I've been a builder for over 40 years. And he's shy on water retention because he's so close to the road and the water table is so high. I understand what the engineer did say about the reservoir and it would overflow. That's a possibility. I'm totally being fair and upfront about this whole situation. Maybe instead of the public, because we do need fair housing in Fairfield, everybody's jumping on that bandwagon. I know it's on Black Rock Turnpike, on Kings Highway. Everybody's doing it now until that 10% criteria gets met through the federal level. I think maybe if you worked along and the public worked along with Sammy, I thought the ones that Turk did were very tastefully done. I'm not too thrilled about the design of this particular unit. But I think if you, instead of just totally shooting him down, say, all right, we got to do something about the water situation. Maybe put a bigger retention system in instead of the 330s. Maybe you could do 10 330s to have a bigger reservoir for that flat roof to go into. Maybe not 20 units, maybe a little less. But instead of, I mean, he's already got a big investment into this area already. He lives there. And he's done a few houses. I thought the last meeting was very unfair to him. And, you know, I think he should try to work along with him. And I think the neighbors should. He's putting $1 million into this neighborhood instead of just sucking the money out of this neighborhood and just renting it. I don't know, I just think you could work along a little bit better with him and maybe ask him questions what he could do to help satisfy this area. I wish a lot of this housing would be torn down because that's why nobody does nothing up there. Because it's an R3 zone, they're all non-conforming as it is. You can't even put a side porch on without going for a variance. It's a hassle. That's why nobody wants to go up into that area and invest because it's so hard to get anything done. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments.
I'm Thomas Braun, and I live at 200 Lakeside Drive, Fairfield. I'm a former member of Solid Waste and Recycling and the Board of Health in town. I'm speaking for my sister-in-law at number 13. I spoke at length last month, so I'll just speak very briefly. One item that really hasn't been touched today is the noise pollution, and it hasn't been mentioned about the generator that's shown on the plans. It's a very massive commercial generator. There's been no discussion of decibel levels. Does it violate any town health ordinances or even state ordinances as to sound pollution? That's something that has to be addressed. In any effect, I'm not even sure why there's a generator there. It's not really necessary. Emergency lighting has battery power. They shouldn't need a generator. Also, as to the water, there's, you know, the engineer talked about this health and safety hazards from water. And and I understand health and safety problems for the general public, but you also have to include the neighbors on either side. Flooding in basements, foundation damage, the mold, et cetera, that is a very definite health and safety hazard for the adjacent neighbors. And that has to be considered in addition to the health and safety hazards for the town as a whole. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else that's formed a line over there? No? Yeah?
Good evening. My name is Adnan Medunyanin. I live at 46 Finch Street. I'm more or less from my uncle. I'm here on behalf of my aunt and uncle who live on 83 Beacon View Drive. I'm actually in support of the project because it's about time to change, especially in that area. I've been on and off on Canfield Drive since '94. So it's like, it's about time something changes there. I mean, it's a little bit overcrowding where people are concerned about, but I don't think that will be an issue in this area. More or less, it's the other side of Beacon View Drive that's really overcrowded. Thank you.
Thank you.
Things to pass out.
Sure, of course. Just hand the stack over there to the clerk. Yep, and she'll...
Sorry for the noise.
No problem. Just, there you go. Just pull the mic down a little bit so you can speak into it. Thanks.
My name is George Harris. I live on 36 Beacon View Drive. And the only thing I really want to talk about tonight is the line of sight. Now, the developer needs a 291-foot line of sight. It might be 315 now, I don't know, but for argument's sake, we'll use 291. And they want to get that line of sight from some point in their driveway to the center of Beacon View Drive where Pine Tree Lane meet, about 20 feet off the curb on my side of the road. And they say that in order to get that line of sight, they need to remove my bushes,
and eliminate the 5 parking spaces from in front of my house. So I'm here to tell you that even if they do those 2 things, they do not have the line of sight that they need, and I'll get into that in a little further. Now, I have a rental unit. Excuse me, I got a little cold.
No problem.
And as a landlord, I'm required to provide 2 parking spaces to my tenants, and I do, on one side of the driveway, and it's back to back. Now, I just had new tenants move in recently, a young couple. He's a mason, and he drives a pickup truck, and he has a fairly large enclosed trailer that he uses for work at times. And he's going to park both those in my driveway back to back. Now, she will have to park in the street, assuming that those parking spaces aren't taken away from us. Now, the distance from my driveway to the proposed project here, parking lot, is 170 feet, okay? So if she had to park in one of those 5 designated spaces that they're supposedly putting aside for us, that's a 340-foot walk back and forth. That's over 110 yards, longer than the length of a football field. And she's gonna have to do this in all kinds of conditions, in the evening, in the rain, in the snow, carrying shopping bags, and so on. So I think we already established, and it's pretty obvious, that there's no way that they can guarantee that they could, any one of those 5 parking spaces are gonna be available for my tenant or anyone else for that matter. So I'd like to ask John, I'm sorry, where do you suggest my tenant park her car when there's no parking spaces available?
No, it's a valid question, and for others, that's a question now received, and hopefully Mr. Fallon will address that in his rebuttal.
Okay. Now, anyhow, there are other reasons why those parking spaces in front of my house should stay. There's other people who park there. Parents park there to pick up their kids from McKinley School. They'll park the car, they'll walk down the pathway, pick up their children, take them home. I've seen Town of Fairfield cars and Department of Public Works trucks parking in front of my house. Utility companies, cable, gas, electric, they all park in front of the house when they're working, the guy's working on a utility pole today, as a matter of fact, and they were parked in front of my house. The postal workers park in front of my house to deliver the mail. We don't have the mailboxes in front of our house where they just drive by and drop them off. They have to park somewhere and walk to the houses to deliver the mail. UPS, FedEx, people from the Pine Tree housing office, it's across the street, park at my house because they only have like 4 parking spaces in their parking lot, maybe 5. I think one of them is handicapped. And of course, there's friends and family of myself and my tenants that also use those parking spaces in front of my house. But back to the line of sight that's needed. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that they need this line of sight 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Does that sound about right? All right. Otherwise, it would make no sense. And as I mentioned before, my tenant is going to park back to back in my driveway, his trailer and his truck. Now, I park back to back as well. I have 4 vehicles in my household. Now, my driveway is 40 feet long to the curb. And it's only 32 feet to the bushes that they want to take down. Okay? Now, a pickup truck is almost 20 feet in length. The trailer that my tenant has is about 15 feet long from the back to the V-nose in the front, which is about a foot shorter than an average mid-sized car. So that's a total of 35 feet. Add an extra foot between the trailer and the truck while they're parked, and now we're at 36 feet. So that 36 feet extends past my bushes. And if you look at page 1, 2, and 3 in the photos, you'll see how the cars extend past the bushes in the way, in the line of sight. Now, after that, we also have my neighbor's driveway on 24 Beacon View Drive, which is only 20 feet long to the curb, and you can see that on page 4. I have it marked, the little yellow line. I used Google Earth, and I measured the distance.
Where's 24?
24 is directly, it's one house over, closer to the development. Okay. Yeah, some of them are marked, some are. If you're looking at the photo, 24 is to the right of my house. You see that little yellow line in the driveway. And on the bottom left, you'll see the measurement.
The yellow line is on the left-hand side of the driveway.
Right, and you'll see the measurement on the bottom left, it says 19.93 feet.
Got it.
Okay, I'm sorry, some of them are marked and some aren't. So now that same driveway is only 12 feet long from the house to the bushes. And on page 5, you could see how far back past the bushes, 16-foot mark, is when a car's parked there. There's the same yellow line there, and I marked it at 16 feet, and you'll see how far past the bushes it goes. So you see, 16 feet is the average length, as a length for the average mid-sized car, and it's literally impossible for my neighbor to park just one car in his driveway without it passing the bushes in my yard. So when his car is parked, it's a good 2 to 3 feet past the bushes, the line where the bushes begin. You can see those on page 6. So, I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to tell my neighbor that he can't park in his driveway? Anyway, in all those cases, I think it's pretty clear that whether it's my house or my neighbor's house, the cars will be in a line of sight, and instead of that 291 feet that they're asking for or looking for, they actually have a 110-foot line of sight, because that line of sight ends every time my neighbor parks his car in his driveway. And on page 7, you'll see I have a measurement from where their parking lot's going to be to my neighbor's driveway, and I think it measures at 109 feet and change. Now, if he's not home, the line of sight will end where my driveway is, right? Which is a little further than that, but still way short of the 290-foot line of sight that they're looking for. And I'm home all the time, I don't go anywhere. So now, if you look at page 8, you'll see the entire 291-foot line of sight crossing over. And you can see where the part of the bushes that need to be removed. But you can see, more importantly, you can see where that line of sight crosses through my neighbor's driveway and my driveway, which would be in the way of the line of sight. Now, this clearly shows that even if my bushes are removed and those 5 parking spaces are eliminated, they're still not going to have that line of sight that they need 24/7. In fact, they're lucky if they have it 4 to 6 hours a day and 4 to 5 days a week. Now, I know about the town's public right-of-way. I understand that. And if the town wanted to use that privilege or right to, let's say, build a sidewalk in front of my property, they could do that, take that frontage. They could also force me to remove my bushes for this project. But they can't keep me or my neighbor from parking their own cars in their own driveways. And because every time there's a car parked back to back in our driveways, the cars extend back 3 to 4 feet behind the bushes. And because there's still another 4 to 6 feet from the curb in, we're not impeding traffic, and we're not in the way of pedestrians walking. So if someone here could tell me that they only need the line of sight a few hours a day and a few days a week, then I say, okay, go ahead and pass it, give it to them. But I don't think that's the case. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Members of the public? Yes, please, come on up.
It's going to be very short, and it's probably redundant what I have to say. But I was listening to Lisa Wexler the other day. You know who she is?
Yeah.
She has a radio show. And Senator Wong was on.
Sorry, yeah.
Senator Wong was on a guest on the Lisa Wexler show, and they were talking about 830G housing. And it is absolutely 100% a fact that the United States, totally, we're lacking housing so badly, so badly. But what Lisa Wexler was saying was that with this 830G, they're plunking as many 830G apartments down into neighborhoods like ours, and our neighborhood is already densely populated with cars, with people walking with the kids whom I see all the time. She sees me with my dog. So what they were saying and what I was listening to and what I say is that they can plunk these units down. I realize that we have to have so many 830G units in so much space, but why can't they be half the units and space them out better? Does it have to be 20 units and 40 units in a condensed neighborhood already? Why couldn't they put 10 units here and 10 units there, or 20 units in a neighborhood that can really accommodate the, you know, the building, the square footage? And this building cannot. We're already densely populated. So that was also what Lisa Wexler and Tony Wang were saying. But I also I took a photo the other day of when it was raining, and I live at Pine Tree. And actually there was flooding right outside my living room window. There's always a flood in the wetlands, okay, that they didn't take care of. But there was also flooding. Every time it rains, there was flooding right outside the Pine Tree office. Do you know where that is? Yeah. So right outside there, the sewer is backed up, and I have a photo here. But it's all the way to Sammy's first property, okay? So if that's flooding and nobody does anything about it, well, where's the, you know, where's it going to start? Where's it going to start? So,
Please.
okay, so nobody's done anything about that flooding. And like I said, I have flooding right in front of my bedroom windows. It's not as bad as it was because they had to fix it before I moved in, but there's still flooding there, and I'm starting to get dampness also there as well. And there's nothing that can be done. Okay, so I'm all for 830G, but in that little tiny space, come on.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Robert Roy. I live on Campfield Drive, and keep it short and brief. You all heard the expression, see no evil, hear no evil, do no evil. Those are the three things that you're looking at, is seeing the project being built that doesn't fit in the neighborhood, in my opinion. I'm here to say, no, don't go with it. You're hearing the facts from both sides, which I hope you take considerately on what's going on. I know you can't favor one side or the other unless you have facts in front of you, which you do in most cases. And doing it, don't do the evil, do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to be heard on this? Going once, going twice. Okay. So that closes the public hearing portion of, closes the public comment portion of the hearing. And I'm going to turn it back over to the applicant now for your rebuttal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the commission for your patience and for your interest and for your public service and your time. I thank the public for their, very gracious way in which they've handled this application and with respect for one another, and I think that speaks well for our town. I particularly commend the chairman relative to remarks he made earlier in the meeting. I think it sets a proper tone relative to the consideration of 8-30G applications, which I know are not easy for the commission and not easy for the public. And that's one of the reasons I thank you for your service and your attention to this application. What I'm going to try to do is cover the points, and I'm going to have Mr. Galante obviously come up here and talk about the sight line in a minute. But before I do that, I think I might just cover some other points just so we then can focus on the sight line. With regard to the air conditioning units, we can certainly move them. We can put them in the back of the building. We could put them, after I compliment everyone on your courtesy, I hope you will earn the compliment. I didn't interrupt you or any of your consultants.
Thank you, Mr. Fallon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We can certainly move those. We can put them on the roof and screen them appropriate. We can put them on the other side of the building. So we can certainly do any number of things with regard to that.
Great.
The generator was mentioned. That's only there for emergency purposes in the event of a power failure. It will meet all code specifications, and it will be compliant with the requirements of our town's noise ordinance.
The sound ordinance. Will that generator have to undergo weekly testing?
Yeah, you know, an hour a week or something like that, correct? But it will, when it does that, it will in fact meet those requirements. There were some comments at the last hearing by a speaker relative to somehow we were using somebody else's easements or something like that on the property. I just want to clarify that, and this is also contained in Ms. Pooley's, I think referenced in her material, which I'll talk about in a minute. Our property has long contained a drainage pipe that solely benefits the adjacent property to the east and allows drainage from the property to flow through the pipe over and under our property into the town manhole and town drainage system. This pipe has been there God knows how long, and it's never been documented by way of an easement benefiting and protecting the adjacent property owner. When this application was reviewed by the town engineering department, as part of their input and request, the engineering department required that the applicant, if this application is granted, would give to the adjacent property owner a private easement that would legitimize that particular pipe and ensure that it would be protected as an easement to the benefit of the adjacent property owner in perpetuity. And in addition, the engineering department is also requiring that we enlarge the size of that pipe, which will again directly and solely benefit the drainage with regard to the adjacent property. So this reference to an easement is true. There is an easement involved, but what it is it's an easement that we are now formalizing and giving to the adjacent property owner for their benefit.
So I think that's typically called an easement by prescription.
Right, but the engineering department would like it to become an easement by recordation.
Sure.
We'll do that.
And that pipe, part of the plan that is being proposed in terms of the excavation and the engineering and the drainage, the drainage engineering is to replace and upgrade that pipe in the easement for the benefit of the adjoining landowner.
Correct.
Okay. Have you had discussions with the adjoining landowner regarding that?
I don't believe we have. It would be a requirement though, because
Sure.
it's one of the recommendations of the engineering department.
Do you think that, well, I believe the property owner is probably here tonight? Yes? Is that your client? Are you, okay. Are you aware of this? Yes. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
That leads me to addressing the question or the testimony that was heard with regard to drainage. I did receive at 7:30 p.m. tonight, and I'm not criticizing, but we received Mr. Trinkus's report at around the same time you did. That was somewhat disappointing since, as you remember, this was continued from January 28th.
Oh, you don't have to tell me about being disappointed at receiving documents that are pages long, that are single-spaced, with technical analyses, and that I'm supposed to receive, review, and consider while I'm being spoken to at the same time.
So you can share my frustration in that regard. But let me boil this right down. I've worked with Laura Cooley for over 40 years. I've had occasion to work with Mr. Trinkus. I'll put my money with Ms. Pooley, with all due respect. This plan, from a drainage standpoint, was reviewed and approved by the town engineering department. You have an email of record from Ms. Pooley, January 17, 2020 at 2:53 p.m. to Mr. Wendt. In that, her first point is, regarding the proposed on-site stormwater detention system, revision dates should be shown on all plans that have recently been revised, such as proposed stormwater control plan. The applicant's engineer has made the adjustments requested, and the drainage system as designed is acceptable. Stormwater attenuation, water quality improvements, groundwater recharge has now been adequately addressed as reflected in the most recently submitted plans, originally dated March 11, 2019. Number two, proposed 8-inch PVC pipe has been changed to perforated, which will help capture any surface water, sheet flow runoff that may accumulate along the north, side of the building and drain into the on-site detention system. She goes on to other points. But the point I want to make is your town engineering department, not to mention the WPCA, since there was some reference to the sewer system, have affirmatively reviewed and approved this application that's in front of you. So before Mr. Trinkus comes in here,
Given the time, and especially the issues, I think you've made your point.
I know, I'm the first person that you've asked to speed up. Have you noticed that? Just for the record, but I will.
With respect to that...
You get it. Okay, that's great. I appreciate it. In any event, apropos of the questions that I think the chair was raising, when you do review, as we've all had a brief opportunity to review, Mr. Trinkus's technical comments, they do not rise to a showing of a probability of a public health and safety issue that would outweigh the need for affordable housing based upon this record. I think at this point in time, I'd like to call on Mr. Galante to basically address all aspects of the matter as it relates to the sight line and what have you. The one thing I would say, prefatory to his comments, and he actually includes material in his February 24th rebuttal. We did get the police and engineering comments on that Friday.
By the way, I appreciate that we received your rebuttal report in advance of the hearing.
And I sent it to Mr. Green at the same time.
And I appreciate that as well. I actually had the chance to review it and digest it.
We appreciate that. The two things I would say, and it's contained in the report, and it just gets to some testimony you heard immediately a few moments ago. The only bushes that are to be removed in order to achieve our sight line will occur solely within the town right of way. You have a diagram to that effect. The second thing, since there was a lot of testimony moments ago about the driveways, when you look at the plans, our sight line is relying totally upon the town right of way. Are there people, you know, Mr. Palick owns 2 houses right there too, but his tenants don't park in the right of way. Maybe other people in the neighborhood have to be more mindful of the right of way, because as somebody points out, somebody could come in tomorrow and maybe it would be a good thing from some of the testimony we've heard and put sidewalks in. And guess what? Then those people whose sight lines would be, whose cars would be blocking our sight line would be blocking the sidewalk. The point is, nobody is obstructing our sight line as we propose it based upon their legal use of their driveway. I'll call on Mr. Galante.
Thanks, before you get there, but can you just answer the question with respect to the 5 spaces that are proposed to be allocated and what the plan is for that?
We will have the 5 spaces located as shown on the plan, most conveniently to Beacon View Drive. We will have them signed with whatever, we can work with staff on the language, but generally it would be public parking, you know, tenant parking restricted.
Public
however
parking?
You want to, but this is what's important, whatever kind of signage language is considered in working with staff to be appropriate, we will police it. This building is going to be managed, and we will see to it that our tenants won't park there.
So even though it's public parking, it will be to the exclusion
of our tenants,
of those cars that are registered for that building.
Correct.
All right, and consistent with a public facility and accommodation, the applicant is going to be responsible for any issues that arise while those public cars and people are parked on, and address and ingress and egress, and if there are any damage issues.
We've already discussed that with our insurance carrier as far as an appropriate rider and coverage on the policy to cover us against those kinds of things. But yes.
So the applicant is willing to a condition of approval that insurance is maintained to cover public parking spaces and accommodation?
Has to be, not only to protect the public, but to protect Mr. Pollack.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
that would be advisable, but not otherwise necessarily required.
But the answer is yes. That would be a condition of approval we'd have no problem with because we're
Okay.
going to do it.
All right, very good.
I'd like to just call on Mr. Galante at this point,
Thank
if
you.
I may, and then I'll have a few brief closing.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mike Galante, now at Hardesty in Hanover, but the clock name is only slowly fading away. Before I get into the letter that's dated February 24th, and as mentioned, the reason why you got that letter yesterday was the police just finished their speed data last Friday. They actually had postponed it, did it a couple different times, but obviously during rain conditions, they had to avoid doing the speed study. So that's what postponed it for probably a couple of weeks, actually. But before I get into that and describe it and hopefully help you understand, the comparison, I just want to go over a couple things that we heard tonight. There's a lot of talk about the CONDOT standards and the AASHTO standards for measuring site distance. Generally, and I'll keep it general just to help everyone, I dream this stuff, but the CONDOT standards were based on the AASHTO standards. That's where they come from. Every state in the country uses the AASHTO standards. Connecticut uses their own standards. When we first met, and by the way, I know the captain's not here, but I want to thank him and the police department, engineering and planning for working with us and having these discussions since the last meeting to really give you the information that you need to make a decision. And I appreciate that. When we first met with Laura Pooley, and of course there's her name again, and we talked about sight lines and measuring site distance and so on for this driveway, one of her first statements, and Mr. Went will either agree or disagree with me, but she said she used the AASHTO standards to look at site distance. So just keep that in mind. We use the CONDOT standards. We actually had a discussion with CONDOT last week, actually the Office of State Traffic Administration, OSTA, which is, in my mind, the administrative arm of Connecticut DOT, and we asked about which standards should we use on a local road, and the answer was any town has the right to use AASHTO standards. So Laura Pooley referencing AASHTO standards, she's certainly correct in doing that. The CONDOT standards come from my discussions with her, I think at our first meeting maybe a month ago. Looking at the two standards to kind of better understand why they give you different answers, forget speed for a minute, but just the different answers and the methodology of coming up with that. CONDOT standards, when you're coming out of a side street, in this case a driveway, you're looking at the actual measurements or decision time, if you will, to make a decision, make the turn, whatever direction you're doing. The CONDOT standards are keeping the right and left turn movements in that calculation. In reality, and I think everyone would agree with me, a right turn is easier to make than a left turn. You need less time to make a right turn, more time to make a left turn. So if you go to the AASHTO standards, well, the CONDOT standards uses a 7.5 second calculation to make that decision and help you decide and measure the site distance. There are charts that do this and there's calculations. The AASHTO standards for right turn only, which is what we have in this proposal, is 6.5 seconds. That's the basic reason for the different answers as far as measurements and distances. I try to keep it very simple, but that's the reason.
That's helpful.
Okay, so just keep that in mind. Sample size, years ago, and I've been doing this a long time, we used the double hose across the road, called them ATRs, automatic traffic recorders, to measure volume, but also measure speed. When you see two hoses across the road, you're measuring speed, obviously. We found that data wasn't reliable, just like the police found with their different type of plate on the pavement. The data wasn't, you just can't have cars doing 70 miles per hour on Beacon View Drive. And that's what the data showed the first time around. It's just not realistic. And that was the comment I had early on, and that's why multiple samples were taken with different methodologies. We stopped using the machine years ago, and we had a discussion with CONDOT. Probably the same person I had a discussion with, actually someone in my office had a discussion last week. We switched to a radar gun because that's what DOT suggested and recommended. So that's what we've been doing for quite a long time. Actually, we just tested this up in Newtown recently, and we got two sets of answers. The hose across the road is much higher than the actual radar sampling. Reason why we use 20 samples, that's what DOT told us to use. Discussions that the police or maybe Bill Hurley actually had with Connecticut DOT, and I think actually the same person, was, well, maybe you should have 50 samples in each direction. It really goes towards the amount of volume on a road. Beacon View Drive is a low-volume road, so I still think that 20 samples is appropriate, and that's what we did at the time. Now, moving forward, we're using 50 samples, and if it's a road such as the Post Road, we're probably going to use 100 samples, radar gun. To just for reference purposes, that's why we use that number. The police used a different methodology. It was done over a holiday weekend. We had discussions about that, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, it took a sample of weekends and holiday and school days and so on. That's one of the reasons why their machine stayed out to Wednesday of last week.
And that's all
Yeah.
great. I mean, wouldn't you agree that more data, the volume of data that was collected by the police department study would be more reliable than 40,
Total
actually, I think
40
it was
samples.
20
Each direction.
20 in each direction.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all.
Okay.
I really don't.
What's the authority for averaging your data with the police department's data, and how do you respond to the other engineer who suggested that a pure average is wholly inappropriate? He didn't believe an average at all would be appropriate, and that even if you did, it would be a weighted average, and in which case it would be a negligible impact to the data and average that the police department studied. What's your response to that?
I will say I agree with the comment about the average. I'm not going to disagree with that. We took a sampling and we put an average together. The results are so close that we did the average. Quite frankly, we had hours to do this.
Well, it's close. I mean,
just like I have always just a few minutes at the end of every hearing.
It's not really fair, though, to say they're just so close, because quite frankly, you know,
well, let me.
You're like on the edge of trying to make an argument to try to get this sight line, to remove hedges, to eliminate parking spaces, to grant parking spaces on the property, to et cetera, et cetera. And if we don't, then we don't have the sight lines. And it could be a matter of life and death. And that's the position that we are in right now, and that you are placing us in order to make that determination.
Absolutely.
Okay? So it's not a slight. It's not a little thing that we should just be flippant about.
No, I'm not.
This is.
No, trust me, I'm not just blowing it off, as some people might say. You know that. You know me.
No,
yeah.
We need you to address it.
Yeah, and I'm going to address it in a minute. But if I didn't have a discussion with Laura Pooley, she would use the AASHTO standards, and the AASHTO standards using the 28.5 miles per hour shows that you have more than adequate intersection sight distance.
Okay.
Okay? I'm not, are you calling Laura or are you calling? So, should I just continue? I just want to go on a couple other things.
So, Ms. Pooley, to my understanding, submitted something which
an email.
Yeah, an email, which
yes.
is why I'm looking at my phone.
No, that's okay.
And I apologize
No,
to everyone for that, but this is the only format that I have it in at the moment.
We may have it printed out. Be
I
easier
would,
to read.
yeah, if you don't mind. I appreciate that. Thanks. And I hope you all don't take my tone in the wrong way. It's 10:30. We've waited a long time to be here. We have to finish this hearing tonight, given the statutory constraints that we're
Understood.
under. Okay?
And I apologize, I'm at the end of the night.
I know
which
you are.
is-
I know you are. And it
seems
is
to
what it
happen.
is, okay?
Yeah.
But
I know this is unusual in the course of a vote, but I just need to say something with respect to the data collection meetings that we had.
sure. Mr. Wendt, please, Mr. Wendt.
One of the fundamental questions that the first time that we gathered, and Captain Calamar's reference, I think we met twice. One of the fundamental questions we talked about initially is to which standard we were going to use, whether it be AASHTO or CONDOT, and we all agreed at the table at that time that we were going to use the CONDOT standard.
Right, because that's typically what even the Frederick P. Clark and Associates uses in their assessments.
That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I mean, he actually said that. I appreciate that, Mr. Wendt. But I mean, listen, I know it because I've been doing this for 10 years now.
With me, actually.
With you. And I read your reports. And it's always CONDOT.
And I know that.
Okay, so Ms. Pooley.
Oh, you're going to read?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Pooley says, after she goes through a whole analysis, she gives you the formula, she talks about the averages, and she says, in summary, the results of the speed study conducted by the Fairfield Police Department with the assistance of Yukon T2 Center indicates that the proposal lacks the required sightline distance and, if approved, will create unsafe conditions for vehicles traveling on Beacon View Drive.
Okay. Can I just add?
And my question is, what is your response to that?
My response is the two tables I put in the report, the letter that you received yesterday. One was the CONDOT standards. Forget the average for a moment, the CONDOT standards. And the second table, table 2, is the AASHTO standards.
Right.
And the reason why I provide both is because CONDOT said the town, every town, all 169 towns in the state of Connecticut have the right to use the AASHTO standards on a local road. I'm just making that statement. When we first met with Laura Pooley, the first meeting, she made the statement about she used the AASHTO standards. And yes, we talked about which methodology we would use. And I said, quite frankly, I said, I would prefer the one that gives me the best result. And I was kind of kidding, but the speed study was conducted by the police department. They didn't calculate the distance. Laura Pooley, I assume, or Bill Hurley calculated that. So she's made that determination based on the speed data that was received. So just clarification. It wasn't the police department.
I get it. I get
That's
it.
fine.
So under your analysis, if we use CONDOT, it's not safe. If
I don't
we
want to use the word not
AASHTO
safe. It's
hold on. Well, Mr. Fallon, let me, please. Okay? That, of course you can, but I really, this is, Ms. Pooley says, based upon her assessment, using CONDOT's standard, that the proposal lacks the required sightline distance, and if approved, will create an unsafe condition. Your rebuttal to that is, maybe so, but if you use the AASHTO standard, then we do have the required sightlines, and it will be a safe condition. Do I summarize that fairly?
It meets the standards, yes.
And so my question to you is, do you want to take that choice? Do you want to take that risk?
No, I think, can I just?
Yeah.
I think we all have to take into consideration here in the context of this 8-30G. I'm just kind of giving everybody, so you know where I'm going to be coming from. The compliance with the technical formula on this CONDOT standard, even if you reject the AASHTO standard, which is a very interesting legal question in the context of public health and safety, in the context of an affordable housing application, and even if you reject the averaging argument, okay, when this is closed and you're left with wrestling with the decision, and quite properly, as the chair said before, weighing the evidence you have against the difficult standard that is applicable to 8-30G, you're going to have to ask yourself whether this is a bright line yes and no, and we may not get the answer for that for a long time, or whether or not, looking at the evidence as a whole, it's reasonable to conclude that the sightline analyses that you have received, including Mr. Galante's, do not support a sufficient evidence standard to say that this sightline, which meets the AASHTO standard, that would meet the CONDOT standard if you average the 226 point what by 28.5, that the technical 28.5, bum, bum, bum.
Do you really believe that those two studies should be averaged without weight whatsoever?
I think
40 cars versus 3,347 cars?
in light of Mr. Galante's...
One day
Yes.
versus 5 days?
Yes.
You think it's appropriate to just average them to determine whether this is safe?
I do, especially in light of the fact that the averaging yields a result that is still more conservative.
You're
than
willing to
than
take the
you
risk
asked
that
me
no
a
one's gonna
question.
die here?
You asked me a question, and then the other question's too provocative to answer. But you asked me if I would accept that, and I said, yes, I would. Because I think that the reasonableness of that assumption is bolstered by the fact that it still yields even a more conservative result than the AASHTO standards, which are an acceptable measurement of sightline safety. I mean, I know it's difficult, but that's really where we are. We're kind of dancing on the head of a pin here.
Yeah, and if you fall one way, somebody could get really badly hurt.
But then you're going to have to determine whether that's sufficient evidence in the record or if that's speculation.
Yep. And your job is to argue that it's not, and I get that.
And it is, and that's my job, but it's also true. Because if I didn't have the AASHTO standard, but bolstering our conclusions as set forth in Mr. Galante's supplemental report of yesterday,
Yeah.
I might not be making this argument. But I think taking that all into consideration and seeing how de minimis, by the way, the differences are between the police department's CONDOT analysis and ours. It's not like, you know, they did 3,700 cars and came up with an average
No, I understand that the
85%
difference
of 35 miles.
That's fair. That's fair. Look,
They're less than 2 miles an hour apart.
15 minutes ago, you were singing Miss Pooley's praises. You were literally saying, "I'll put my money on her any day."
Certainly
And
on
here I am
drainage issues.
Hey, let me finish now. And here I am looking at an email from that same Miss Pooley, who affirmatively states that if approved, this will create unsafe conditions for vehicles traveling on Beacon View Drive. And you're asking me to disregard her conclusion. I mean, how else can I see that?
I would say two things to you on that. One, my comments that I have greatest respect for Laura across the board, but they were relative to her detailed drainage analysis. Secondly, if I don't...
Talk about dancing on the head of a pin.
She says we'll create unsafe conditions, okay, for vehicles traveling. That is her opinion. I respect her opinion, but in the context of this evidence and the sufficiency evidence standard in an 8-30G application and weighted against everything else that you have here, including AASHTO, I don't think that that statement rises to the level of sufficient evidence to deny this application based upon a finding that there is a probability, a quantifiable probability of public health and safety considerations that outweigh the need for affordable housing.
What would?
A more definitive statement that lacked the AASHTO standard and lacked the fact that these two analyses by the police department and Mr. Galante are substantially the same in terms of their findings on the 85th percentile.
Commissioner Bremen.
Are there other Connecticut municipalities that you're aware of that use the AASHTO standard with regularity?
I defer to Mr. Galante.
Mike Galante, I can't name them, but some towns certainly do. I'd have to check. I just don't know. But, Mr. Chairman, if I may, my reputation is important to me, and I'm sure you would agree. I'm making my statements on what we found with the AASHTO standards using the police department's speed of 28.5 miles per hour.
Yep.
If I wasn't using that at all, I'd be standing here saying we're 14 feet short. And if I was before CONDOT, would they accept the 14-foot short? They might. They really look at each one individually. They don't typically do that, but I have seen them do that. If it's 6 feet, 10 feet, they'll say try to get the maximum you can. I can't cite locations, but we do work throughout the state.
Well, you didn't ask them to review this proposal in that regard, did
No,
you?
not at all.
You don't have any opinion from CONDOT with respect to whether this proposal meets the standards or is safe or is not safe?
No, just methodology.
All right.
Just methodology, and that's it. Someone asked a question about accidents, and you are correct. We do have accident data in the report, and there were no reported accidents in a 3-year period from the police department. We always include that information.
Does somebody else? I'm sorry, I'm like
That's okay.
diving in here.
No, and I appreciate your comments, as always.
No. Commissioner Gordon?
I asked it because I thought I read it somewhere in some of the papers that someone said that there was. That's why I wasn't sure.
Someone made a statement tonight.
Someone, no, in our papers as I was
Oh.
reading through, so that's why I'm not exactly
I don't know.
remembering exactly where I read it, but somebody had said that there were accidents on that road.
Well,
And it might
someone
have
may
been
have said it,
someone's-
but we always go
Yeah,
to the
so
police
that's why I
department and
wasn't
get
sure
the
if it
accident
was-
records for a 3-year period, and we document it, and we put a summary table in the report. We don't put the accident reports in the body of the report because it has everyone's names that had the accident.
Mhm.
So we don't do that. So we just put a summary in there.
Okay, but there were no accidents in the past 3 years.
None at all, 3 years.
3 years.
3 years,
right.
yes.
To be clear, no accidents in the last 3 years that were reported to the
Reported.
police and
Nope.
for which the police department generated a police report that was then logged in the system and produced to you.
No reported accidents is correct. There could have been an accident that wasn't reported, so
Right.
we wouldn't have that.
Yeah, I could look back and see if I can find that.
Thanks. Commissioner Levy?
Thank you. Let me just see if I understand this. The sight line, as you measure it, is 301 feet,
Yes, yes.
and using the CONDOT standard, 301 feet is adequate, correct?
The 301 feet would be adequate for the average, if you will.
Right.
The 26 miles per hour that we recorded, you would need the 291. For the police department speed, you would need 315.
Okay.
Okay? Let me just flip to the next table, so just to kind of...
You're going to need to
Picture.
speak more directly into the microphone.
Table 2 is just a reference to the AASHTO standards. Again, with well, forget the average. The police department, 28.5, you need 273 feet. With our speed of 26 miles per hour, you need 249 feet. We have the 301 feet. So using the AASHTO standards is why I make the statement that we have adequate sight distance. Okay?
So, but you do have 301, and if my math is correct,
I think you need to use the microphone too.
move it closer. We're talking a difference of between 7.2 seconds and 7.5 seconds in terms of the amount of time it would take a vehicle to traverse either 301 and 314 feet, correct?
I'll say yes. I haven't
Well,
calculated that.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about 0.3 of a second would be the difference between having a 301-foot sight line and 314 feet.
The sight line is based on that 85th percentile speed that
Right.
whether we collected it or the police department, that's the speed that's used. Keep in mind, the 85th percentile speed is if you have 100 cars, 85 of those cars are going 26, 20, whatever, 28 and a half miles per hour or lower. 15 cars are going over that speed, just in very simple terms. And just my sampling of the 20 cars, we excluded the cars coming out of the side roads, such as Pine Tree or Park Drive. We
Excluded the cars that were making the turn.
just through
and-
through moving cars. So just so I get a little credit back. Okay. But that's how we
No,
did
it's
it.
fair. It's just a big difference in terms of the sample size, right? That's all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Does that answer the question
Yes.
for the moment?
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? Yeah, Commissioner Newton?
When the captain was up there, I believe he had testified that, where'd it go? When he was out there, I think he was viewing it, the traffic. Vehicles coming from Park Avenue.
He mentioned, I think he
were
may have
going
meant
fast.
Pine Tree, because when we had our discussions, we talked about the Pine Tree approach. Jim, do you remember that?
Well,
We
I
did-
doubt Pine Tree, because I think his point was if you just focused on the vehicles coming from Park Street, Park
Yeah.
Square, and you just focused on that those vehicles were traveling at a faster rate.
They were accelerating from supposedly a stop location. But keep in mind,
So the ones coming from that turn are not in motion. They're accelerating from just having made a turn. So those are going to be moving at a slower rate of speed than others that are
Okay, so I
driving
got it backwards.
through
Yeah.
the neighborhood and on Beacon.
We didn't count those, but when he was out there and he was watching the speed that the sign was actually showing the speed, someone pulling at a pine tree, and that's the one we referenced because we're looking at the cars coming from the left.
Yeah.
If we're having a right turn, that's why I think he may have been mixing up streets. Those cars, he said, were doing 9 miles per hour. So his data picks up that number, and he also picks up the higher speeds. We excluded the car coming out of that side street. We just automatically took the car that was coming through and around the curve in each direction. Actually, we did both directions. Just for clarification.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean,
Okay.
I think that works both ways, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so you're arguing that your smaller sample size is more accurate because you excluded some of those
Yeah.
slower cars. And on the larger sample size of 3,300 plus, it includes those cars, which brings his average a little down.
Yep. Yeah.
And
And that's why I admit, oh, sorry.
Finish what you were going to say.
No, just, that's why we did this comparison, and that's why we use the average in our office, just to do a comparison. We, quite frankly, don't typically do the average between two different sources. Okay, we rely on one.
Yep.
And that's why we did it, just to kind of compare them, okay?
AASHTO, though, AASHTO is a national standard
Yes, yes.
that Connecticut municipalities are allowed to utilize.
Yes,
And CONDOT is something that only.
on a state highway. But you can use CONDOT on any, as I have, any local road, but state DOT says a town can use AASHTO on a town road.
Does any other, is the methodology used in CONDOT used anywhere else?
CONDOT's methodology?
Yes.
No, no.
So it's unique to Connecticut. AASHTO is national.
Yeah, I mean,
Allow-
if we do work in New York, as you may know, we use AASHTO all the time. Okay. In other places, in New Jersey, I mean, we've done work in different places. It's always AASHTO.
Anyone else? No? Very good. Thank you, Mr. Galante.
Thank you.
Again, I want to thank you for your time. I'm not going to lecture this commission about 8-30G because as the chair's remarks earlier tonight indicate, you're very well versed with that. You understand the burden, you understand the standard of proof, you understand that what you have to find in this evidence is a quantifiable probability that a significant public health and safety matter issue will occur, and that probability, substantially quantifiable probability, outweighs the need for affordable housing. All I'm saying respectfully, and I know it's a tough case, and I know there's the focus here, no pun intended, is properly on the sight line. But understanding the standard, for better or for worse, as I think we do, I encourage and implore you to look at this data that's been thrown at you very recently very carefully, because I feel comfortable, not only as an advocate, but as someone, you know, who has some responsibility in terms of public health and safety considerations and what I advocate. I am comfortable looking at all this data, those charts that Mr. Galante just had up here that are part of his February 24th letter, where basically what it says in essence is, hey, if you apply AASHTO, which is a national standard, the sight line is fine. If you apply the average between the 26 point whatever and the 28 point whatever, the sight line is fine. But if you apply strictly the CONDOT standard to the police commission's 85th percentile findings, you're off by 13 feet. I take all that together, both logically and as a lawyer, understanding the standard of 8-30G, and I find it very difficult to conclude, based upon that evidence, that this record has established a quantifiable probability that a specific harm will result if the application is granted, and mere concerns alone do not amount to sufficient evidence to support the denial of an affordable housing application. That's where I come out on this. I think the drainage issues we've covered. I will point out, I didn't say, we've heard testimony from some residents that there's a lot of drainage and water problems in that neighborhood. Well, clearly, one of the things that will occur as a result of the investment of Mr. Palick and the due diligence of the town engineering department is, at least somewhat, as it relates to this property, those drainage concerns will be mitigated because the water will be detained. And that's really where we are. You guys have been more than patient and attentive. I always feel, whatever you decide, I know this commission knows this law, and I know this commission has the character, the integrity, and the backbone. When the applicant's wrong, you're going to tell us. But when there isn't evidence in the record to meet that difficult standard for this difficult statute, this commission has shown, as it did tonight, that you have the integrity, the knowledge, and the forbearance to do what the statute and the case law commands. And that's all we ask you to do here. And I thank you so much for your attention.
2 quick questions.
Yes,
Oh,
Commissioner Noonan.
Yes. It was a good finish. Sorry.
No problem.
Your sightline analysis, I believe you said, depends only on removing the shrubs.
The shrubs in the right-of-way, they're shown on the plan.
But not
yes.
the driveways.
Our sight line is drawn only in the town right-of-way, as is normally the case. To the extent there's been testimony that cars parked in, quote, driveways are going to impede the sight line, the answer to that is those cars are illegally parked in the town right-of-way.
Well, my question,
whoa. Hey, whoa.
My question,
Come
I
on.
guess, goes more towards the shrubs. What standing do you have
That's correct.
to knock down the shrubs? Yeah, I understand they're in a public right of way.
Right.
But if you need that to happen,
Mm-hmm.
I would surmise that the town that has the standing to knock down the shrubs, not necessarily you, the private developer.
Two answers to that. One, it's been very, very common over the years, as I'm sure you may know, that we have, in terms of achievement of sightlines, mandated, as part of this commission's decision, removal of impeding shrubbery in the town right away. The Maplewood Assisted Living Facility just somehow pops into my mind. We do that all the time. The second thing I think you have to consider, again, especially in the context of an 8-30G, is I don't think a judge would be well disposed if he or she were to say, well, they had the sight line, and all they need to do was have the town remove some shrubs in the right-of-way for safety purposes, but for purposes of this 8-30G, they determined not to do that, although they've done it regularly over the years for other projects.
Thank you.
You also need 5 spaces removed from the street, yes?
We also, just like you were talking about, and we'll go to the police commission on that, but frankly, my analysis on that is the same. I think that if that's in order to achieve a sight line for safety purposes in the context of an 8-30G, where the applicant is in fact providing mitigated 5 spaces on their own property.
I'm merely supplementing your answer to Commissioner
Right.
Noonan's question, which was, is that the only thing you need to do? Shrubs,
And
the
the-
answer
and the
is
spaces.
no. You need to do the shrubs in the
And the
right-of-way.
spaces. Correct.
And have removal of 5 public parking spaces on the street, for which you are allocating 5 on your property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Francis.
Do you know, Attorney Fallon, what the decibel level is in this town?
I don't, but the
I
noise
don't.
ordinance is online, and
Yeah.
it's quite detailed,
And who measures it?
in my experience, if there's a complaint, the town, either the town health department or the public works department, is the zoning?
And the
police department.
The police
like I
used to measure.
Yeah, and
it.
they have a machine, and they'll go out and they'll do it.
And
Yep, I got you. I'm sorry.
One more.
no, I'm just thinking about it. I feel that it should be measured with all the discussion.
We have no
we've had,
problem
yeah.
as a condition of
But
approval.
I don't know what, I don't remember. I used to know long ago.
Condition of approval that there has to be documentation of compliance
Yeah.
of the generator.
And the shielding too,
With
as
the,
you mentioned.
with the town noise ordinance. We have no objection to that. Mr. Corcoran?
I'm just unfamiliar with this concept that you can't park in your driveway in the right-of-way. I mean, you can park in the street in the right-of-way. Why
Well,
are driveways different?
I don't think anybody's going to arrest you, but at the same time, the point that I'm making in the context of this application is we have a right to achieve a sight line, as that term is defined, utilizing the town right-of-way. If the town right-of-way is being impeded by a vehicle that is not parked on the property of the property owner, but in the right-of-way, that's not a basis to deny our application.
Is the right-of-way from the curb in 10 feet?
I believe so, yes. 10 feet? Approximately, yes. It varies, but yes.
It's a lot.
Certainly, this is something that we can look into as a legal matter and
Yes.
come to our own conclusions, right?
I thank you again.
Okay. Very good. With that, I will close the public hearing on this item, and I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
We made it